Are you looking to finally master Notion? You've come to the right place. Here are 99 Notion tips that will make you an absolute Notion pro. And to make this video easier to navigate, I've broken them down into 5 categories. Aesthetics, so making Notion pretty. Functionality, aka building really cool stuff in Notion. Efficiency hacks, to use Notion more easily. Teams, if you want to run your business in Notion. And last but not least, supercharge, how you can push Notion truly to its limits. Within each category, we always start with the easy tips and work our way to the really advanced ones. And for some of those tips, I've actually recorded already in-depth tutorials. You will find all of these linked in the description. So let's get started with the first category, Notion aesthetics. These tips will help you design workspaces that look so much better. Because if the system looks good, we are a lot more likely to use it. Let's kick this list off with tip number 1, how to change your Notion page layout and the font. This is one of the first things you probably want to customize when you jump into Notion. And for the first part regarding to layout, it's the fact that everything is centered. So there's a lot of white space on the left and on the right of your pages, depending on how wide your screen is. And if you want to use all that screen real estate, then you need to click on the top right, in the top right corner on the 3 dots, and then on full width. And now your page utilizes all the space. Which one of the two you prefer will really depend what you have on the page, right? For a lot of text ones, it's actually quite nice to have them in the middle, so I'm going to turn it back off. And now we're back with our more centered look. And then the second part is the font. So if you click on the 3 dots, you will see here you have style and you have the default font, and you can also change it to one with serif and one with mono if you prefer this type of look of the page. Now, very, very important, these settings always only apply to the specific page you're on. You cannot in Notion right now change this on a global level and say, right, for every new page that I set up, please give me this. I will show you a tip later though, how you can get nearly there so you don't have to turn it on for every single page. So these are these 2 things. And then the last thing is you can also toggle on small text if you want to have everything a bit smaller on your screen, but usually I have that one off. For tip number 2, it's time to choose sides. Are you team dark mode or are you team light mode? Now, personally, I prefer light mode. But if you want to change your settings, all you need to do is go into your Notion settings, which you can find always in the sidebar under settings and members. And here under My Settings, you will find the Appearance tab. And here you can change between light mode, dark mode, and just use system settings. And that's how easy it is to switch between them. Now, top tip, if you don't want to go into the settings, you can also just press Command, Shift, and L if you're on a Mac, or Control, Shift, and L if you're on a Windows to just quickly toggle between dark and light mode in an instant. Tip number 3 is all about picking a consistent color scheme for your Notion setup and then sticking to it. Now, as you might know, in Notion you have 10 different colors available. And you can find these colors whenever you highlight any text and then click on the A drop down. Here you will see all the color options, or alternatively you can always click also on the 6 dots, and then under color, this is also where all the colors show up. And you can always pick 2 different types of colors. You can pick the text color itself, and you can pick a background color, right? So this one doesn't have any background right now, but if I go on here and then I say, okay, color, please give me a purple background, then you will see that the whole thing has been highlighted in purple. Now, the most important thing when it comes to making your Notion pages look more aesthetic is to pick one color or maybe 2 and stick to them. Because if you use a lot of them, maybe you can, pull off that whole rainbow look, but most of the time it looks better if you pick one major color and then apply that area. So you see on this page, that's purple, but again, you could pick pretty much any color. Now, that's the first part of it, picking this one color scheme and sticking to it. And then the second one is to preset your icons. In Notion, you can give every page an icon simply by hovering around the headline of the page and then clicking on Add an Icon. And here under Icons, you have the option to either use one of the emojis or to upload your own custom emoji, or going on Icons and then picking one of these really nice and minimal icons. And the top tip here is that if you click on the Select Icon Color part, you can either ask it to ask you about the color every time, right? So that means whenever I click on any icon, it will ask me which color I should apply. Or what I would recommend is to pick that one color that you pick, for your whole workspace, set as a default, and then that way, whenever you add any icon to your page, it will already match your color scheme. Speaking of icons, you can also add an animated icon or banner to your Notion page, and doing so is super simple. All you need to do is to go to your GIF page of choice. So in this case, I'm using Giphy, and then you can click on the copy link icon on whatever it is that you want, right? So I want to grab this for my page, and then you can again click on Add Icon, and then you hover over to the custom part, paste in your link, click on Submit, wait for it to load, and there you have it. Your page has now a GIF. Now for icons that can sometimes get a bit distracting, so let's actually remove this one again and look at banners. And here I particularly like the 8-bit style, so if you look on Jiffy for 8-bit or for pixel art, you get these nicely animated graphics, and again you can just right click them, and then the one thing you want to do is you want to say copy image address, and then again head on over to Notion, click on add cover, and then change cover. And here, besides the gallery, the upload and unsplash, you want to go to link, paste in your link, submit it, and then you get your animated banner here, and you can easily reposition it to whatever position you want it to. Tip number 5 is about adding inline emojis with the emoji keyboard. Did you know that if you press Window plus dot on a Windows machine or Control Command Space on a Mac, that you can pull up an emoji keyboard and get emojis pretty much anywhere? Not just in Notion, this works in pretty much any app on your computer. So all we need to do is press the keyboard shortcut, and there our picker goes up and we can either search for a specific emoji or use one of our favorites and just insert it here to spruce up our page, guide users, right, and help them quickly explain the context, or just make it nicer to look at. Tip number 6 to create more aesthetic Notion workspaces is all about using multiple columns. And creating columns on Notion is super easy. You have 2 ways to do so. The first one is to just take any information on your page that you want to turn into a column. For example, let's say this heading I want to position next to this heading, and then clicking on the 6 dots and starting to drag it until you see this blue indicator line turning into a side line, right? This would mean we just drop it below, but if we get it here on the side and it goes small like this, it means we drop it to the side. And now we created 2 columns, and we can now drag and drop the other information below these things. So again, we see our indicator go small below it, and now we have things in this left-right alignment. The second option to create these columns would be to just go into any new line, type slash, and then call for columns, and then pick one of these options. So again, I want to create 2 columns, and now I have them here, and now I can drag and drop anything that I want in here. So let's take our philosophy and put it in the left column, and then in the other column, let's put our Notion icon and quickly resize it, and now we have our side-by-side column layout. Tip number 7, start using page dividers. Getting dividers in Notion is super simple. Again, you have several methods. The first one is to just go into any new line, type slash divider, and then pick the divider option. And now you have this small and minimal line here that helps, break up things a little bit. That's particularly nice if you have this like multi-column layout and you add them below both your headings just to give the whole page a bit more structure. Now, method number 2 is all about using the background color. So you can just, again, take a new line and have an empty line, and I will just drag this here so that we actually have a full line. And then we click on the 6 dots, and then on color, and then we can give it a background color. So let's give this the purple background color, and now we have this small purple divider. We can also, if we want to have it bigger, actually go here and say, well, turn this please into an H1. And then we just need to add a space to the line so that this heading 1 placeholder disappears. And now we have a thicker divider. That's the second method. And method number 3 would be to go into Canva or any tool of your choice and create a super narrow image. And that you can design, of course, however you want. And then just embed that into Notion as a visual divider with a few more elements than just background color. Tip number 8, start using toggles. Toggles are a small but super mighty feature in Notion, and they're super useful to hide information or better structure a page. Now let's say, for example, we have here this stuff below our different points of our manifesto, and that's nice, but we want to clean up the page a little bit. So one thing that we can do is we can turn these into toggles. And if we already have our text, what we can do, and what we can always do in Notion, is to just click on the 6 dots and say turn into, and then toggle list. And now we have this toggle that we can open and close, and we can just take our text and we can drag it in here. And now we can close this to create a much cleaner look. So here's how they now look with all 4 as toggles, and we can just open and close them to see more information. In particular, if you have a lot of stuff in them, that's really helpful to clean it up. The second way to create a toggle is, of course, to just go into any line, type slash, and then toggle, and that brings up the toggle option. Now, one thing that's also really cool is that you can also turn headings into toggles, right? So in here, if we don't want this joiners information to be displayed all the time, we can just, again, click on the 6 dots and say, well, turn this into a toggle heading and the type. And now everything below it is hidden, and we can open and close it just like we want. Tip number 9 is about one of my favorite layout elements in Notion, callouts. Getting a callout into your page is super easy. You just type /call and then pick the callout block. And every callout block has 3 elements. You can pick a specific icon or emoji. You can have a background color that you can change by clicking on the 6 dots and then on color and picking a different background color here. And then of course the text it contains. So for example, we could just take this text element that we have in here and we could add it in here to draw a bit more attention to it. Now, the cool thing about callouts, and something that's not immediately obvious, is that they can actually have multiple lines, and you can have anything that you can in general have on a Notion page also inside a callout. Now, if you just press enter in a callout, you will always get outside of it, and it looks like all that it can contain is this one line of text. But you can actually drag and drop anything in there, and once you do that, you sort of unlock this callout. So let me just take this element and drag it below here, and you can see our blue indicator again like jumps inside the callout. And if I leave it here, I have now this stuff inside the callout. And now, once I've done this once, I can go in here and I can press enter, and I could add anything in here from an image, right? So I can have any type of upload. We can have a database in here. We can have anything in here that we could have in a normal Notion page, and through that create these visual elements that have like a container box around them and really help break up our Notion page further. Tip number 10 is about using empty callouts for clean layouts. Let me show you what I mean. Now, here we have a database with our different teams, and of course we could just add this database as is to our page, but we could use also a callout to spruce up the layout a little bit. And in order to do that, let's just add a callout here. And instead of using this colored background with an icon, let's actually make it clear. So for that, we click on the 3 dots, and then for color, we select the default background. That will get rid of everything but this minimal line around it. And then in order to get rid of our icon, we unfortunately can't turn it off, but what we can do is we can pick an icon that is just the same color as the filling that we have. So in this case, just a plain white square. So I will go to custom and I will upload a file, and I've prepared a Notion placeholder icon for this and for any other color. It's actually part of the Notion starter pack that you can download in the description. So there you have that then for like every type of callout. So in this case, the white one. And now you see it's super clean. And as soon as I have like anything in here in this first line, let's take a dot and then a space so the Notion AI disappears. You see, I just get this super clean look of the borders around. It's the only way to get this like border look in Notion. And now what I can do is I can simply drag and drop my gallery in here. And now I have this very clean look of the gallery inside this surrounding part. Now, we have always this like header part, right? We can't get rid of it and we can only have text in here. So now to like space it out evenly, we want to take another line and drag it down below. And now everything is evenly spaced out, and we have this, our database inside another visual element, which can really help to break the page up. And if you use them together with the other design elements, really improve the aesthetic of your Notion workspace. Speaking about databases, tip number 11 is all about hiding a database name. So whenever you create a database, you always get this name part, and sometimes you just don't want that here. So one thing that you can do is you can click on the 3 dots next to it and click on Hide Database Title to make it disappear. You can do the same by clicking on the 3 dots here and then going to Layout, and then here you have this toggle to show the database title or to hide it. But I personally like to hide it most of the time because it just creates this much cleaner look. Which brings me to tip number 12, using empty view names to create even cleaner looks. Now, hiding the database title is a great start to create this really minimal Notion look. But another thing that you should definitely look at is about hiding the actual view name or removing it. So as you can see, whenever you have a database anywhere, you always have different view options. And typically you need to enter a view name. But since a few Notion updates ago, you can actually click in here, say rename, and then just add an empty space in the view name, and now it disappears. And now you only have that icon. So if you want to create it even cleaner, we can then go into rename again, right, and replace that default icon with one that we want. So in this case, right, for teams, we might want several people. And now we have this far, far more minimal and clean look compared to this fairly cluttered one where we have the database title and the view name in there as well. Tip number 13, get some color into your databases. Now, unlike any other Notion element, you can't click on the 6 dots of a database and then choose a color for it. There's simply no option for it. But if you have your database inside either one of these callouts or inside a toggle, you can set the color for it by setting the color for the toggle or for the callout. Let me explain you what I mean. If I now click on the 6 dots here of my callout and I say, well, the text color in here should be purple, you can see that the text color of all the database components in here changes as well. And even better, if I now click on here and say, well, give me also a background of purple, you see that everything, that was a text, background color purple, everything except for the individual cards is now purple. Of course, in that case, I would need to swap out my white icon for a purple icon to get a clean look again, but you get the gist. And the same thing works if you have a toggle. So if I create like a toggle here, and it can be a toggle list or a toggle heading, and I take the database and drag it in here, you see it again inherits the same settings that a toggle has. So the second I turn here the color to green, everything in here will be green. And the second I give this color a background color, let's say brown for example, everything except for the toggle cards themselves and for the database cards themselves also inherit that color. So that's how you can get colorful databases until Notion finally releases that setting directly. Notion tip number 14, quickly resize the columns in your databases. Now, if you build any type of database, you probably have a lot of columns in them. And one thing to create a much cleaner look is to change the default width of each column depending on what you actually need. And of course, you can go in here and just like manually drag it around, but much quicker way to do the same is to just double click on this blue line and then it will automatically resize to whatever size you need it to be. Tip number 15, how to get super narrow columns for checkboxes. Now, you probably know that in Notion, your properties have a certain minimum width. So for example, my last edited column, I can't resize it to be super small. However, if it's a checkbox property, I can. So in this case, right, where I see whether something is done or not, I can take this and I can make it narrow until only the checkbox is left. And then I can, for example, drag it to the very front of the view for a very clean and minimal look. Now, you might run into a situation where you have another property that you also want to have super thin. The workaround here, for example, for the status icon, would be to turn it temporarily into a checkbox. So let's say edit property, and then the type, we will move it to a checkbox. And even though this has nothing to do with what we're actually doing here, right? This is a formula property, which has a formula to display green or red, depending on the status. We can temporarily change it, then resize it to be super small, then right-click again and turn it back into the previous type, and it will magically remember what formula it had. So now it's a formula again, and now we have our super small status things, and we can drag them as well to the front so we can see at a glance, okay, what is done and what isn't. Tip number 16, get some Notion wallpapers. If you want to extend the Notion aesthetic beyond your workspace, then this pack of wallpapers for your phone is a great way to do so. You can download them with the link in the description. They're part of the official Notion wallpaper collection, and they're really cute and amazing. Speaking of cleaner database looks, tip number 17 is to turn off wrap columns for your databases. Now, by default, Notion automatically wraps your text. That means if you have a lot of stuff in your different properties, you will end up with these giant looking entries in your database. But oftentimes you actually don't want that and want a much cleaner, more structured look. For that, you can click on the 3 dots of your database, and then under layout, you will find the option wrap all columns. And if you toggle that off, you see that it collapses into this nice and clean look. And then of course you could use the double click function that I showed you before to resize it to the proper length if you actually need to see everything on one line. And in the case that you actually want to see certain properties wrapped and others don't, you can right click the individual properties and turn on wrap for those. So let's say we want to wrap the task name because that one we always want to see, but we don't want to wrap this giant text that we've generated for it. And in this case, get this, like compromise between all the information that we need in some properties and a mostly clean look on the other hand. If you want to go beyond Notion's normal aesthetic elements, then you should definitely explore widgets. There are a lot of widget websites for Notion. You can just type Notion widgets into Google. Indify is one of them that I like to use, but you can actually also use non-Notion specific widgets. Pretty much anything that is embeddable somewhere can be added to Notion. So in this case, let's just get a quick clock one for our workspace. So we can just here create on clock widget and we say, okay, just let's call this clock. We click on continue and then we wait a second for it to load. And then we can customize this in this case, right? But different dashboards or apps will have different options. And the main part is that at the end, we want to get this link and we want to copy that link and then head on over to our Notion workspace. And here we can now embed this by simply pasting it and picking the create embed option. And again, this works for pretty much anything that is embeddable. So not just Notion specific widgets, but yeah, any website that gives you these widgets that you could embed on your own website. And then we could, of course, just add this in here and drag it into the rest of our page, depending on where exactly we want to have it. We can then resize it with these bars on the side if you want to make it smaller. And we can also pick the alignment. So if we just hover over it, we see, this alignment option. We could say, okay, please center align this. By the way, this alignment option also works for all the other images. Haven't shown that, but you could also align the Notion icon again to make this look, well, properly centered everywhere. Tip number 19 for better Notion aesthetics is all about showing relations in different ways. Typically what happens is if you create a relation between two databases and then you connect a few pages, like here I have my operations department and I connected some docs to it, that they are shown as part of your properties at the top of the page. Now, if you don't want that and instead you want a certain cleaner look, then you can click on these 6 dots here and then you can say show as, and instead of showing them as a property, you could show them as a page section, and that brings them down here. And now you have them actually here, and here you could even turn on certain other properties that you want to see. For example, if you wanted to see the review status that I have here, then we could show that directly on the page as well. Or to make it even more minimal, we can click on it again and then we can say show as minimal. And then all we have is this like 4 doc section in here, and we can click on it to see what we've actually linked to. And again, here we can turn on and off certain properties that we want to see in the preview. And that way we can keep the properties that we show up here to the ones that we can actually edit, right? So only the ones where we have certain other information other than these relations. For tip number 20, we go quickly back to columns. Now, remember earlier I showed you how to turn on full width for your Notion pages. But even if you have a narrow page width, you can extend certain elements to full width. And that's the case if you have columns, right? You need to have a column for that, at least 2. It doesn't work with only 1 column, but if that's the case, right, for example, for our 2 images that are in 2 columns here, we can start dragging them out and we can drag them wider than the actual page. So if we are here on the column part, we can drag that one out and you can see they expand now beyond the narrow part of the original page. That's particularly nice if you have like these landscape images, right, that you want to embed in a narrow page next to each other, and otherwise they just wouldn't have enough space. And now with that part, you can extend them over the whole page. Notion tip number 21, adding a table of content. Particularly for longer pages, you probably want to add a table of content to make it easier to jump between sections. And doing so is super easy. You just want to go into a new line, type /TOC for table of contents, click on it, and there you have it. And it's automatically formatted based on the different header levels that you use on your page. Now, you can format that for different colors, to apply different colors, right? So we can go here, color, and make it purple to keep in line with the rest of our page. And of course, you can combine it with some of the other tips that I shared with you before. For example, you could drag it into this first call out to create this clearer section. And then if you say, okay, I don't want to see that all the time, you could then have a toggle, right, to hide it behind. And then in here, you have maybe your TOC like this, and you can expand it if you want to jump down, or you can hide it like this if you don't want to see it. Another example, you could move it on the side of your content. And for that, you probably want to turn on full width of the page so that you actually have a bit more real estate to work with. And then type /call for 2 columns, and then get a call out here, right? One of our super clean ones without anything in there. So we just get our empty line in here, and then in here we have now our table of contents, and we can remove the dot for that even cleaner look. And then we can resize this column to go on the side, and we can take all the other things, the other elements on this page, and drag them in the other column. And now we have on our right this nice little widget for our table of content, and on the right the actual content of the page. Tip number 22, add navigation elements using Notion buttons. Notion buttons can do a lot of powerful things, and they can also help the aesthetics of our Notion pages. So let's pretend this is an onboarding page, and once the user is done reading this one, we want them to read a specific second page. So at the bottom of it, we could of course just like have a normal link to that page, or we could have a button, which looks a bit nicer. So we type /button, and then in here we want to pick as the option open page. And then where it says select page, we want to select the one that should be opened. We can just pick anyone in this case, but otherwise you would search for the one that you want to use specifically. And then we want to make sure that it says open page in the full page mode, because otherwise we don't get this like, okay, jump to the next part feeling. And then we can set up an icon. So in this case, right, we want to have this arrow, and then we like read on or whatever text we want to have in here. And now we have our button, and once someone clicks it, we jump to that specific page. And to create this real UI feeling, right, where typically you would have this button on the right side, you can then, of course, like create again some columns, and you can drag this into the right column, and then you could resize the columns to push it more to the other side so that you get this actual, okay, now I'm done with the page, and now I click this button to jump like you're used to from a web page. Tip number 23 extends this use of buttons to also change database views. Now, of course, you probably know that in Notion you can have several views for a database. And in this case, they typically show up like this, right? You have your minimal list and then your calendar, and you can navigate between them. But if you want instead a slightly different look, you could also use buttons to achieve the same by creating a separate page for each view that you want. So in this case, we have minimal and we have calendar as separate pages, and then adding buttons at the top. In particular, if you have a lot of these and you want to add other page elements that are only relevant for specific views, this can be really nice to create this navigation. So you see, I can just click on calendar and I jump here, and on minimal I jump here. And they are set up the exact same way, right? We just, whenever we click it, we open a page in full page, and with that, we can recreate these other UI elements from Notion in a slightly nicer way. Tip number 24 wraps up the section on navigation with a navbar in Notion. Now, of course, on every page, you always get your breadcrumbs. So at the very top, you see exactly where your page is. And you can also actually get them in the page if you want by simply typing / and then breadcrumb. And that way you get the same part that you have up, here somewhere inside the page. But typically, you don't want to just organize your pages hierarchically like this, and you want to instead create a different type of navigation. And in order to do so, I like to add navigation bars. So the most minimal and easy way to do so is to just get two dividers. So like so, a divider and a divider, and then drag an empty line between them. And now in here, you can simply type out whatever pages you have in your system. So for example, I could say home, and then just add one of these lines between them. So we could say home, we could say Teams, and like my workspace, whatever pages you have in your system. And then you can copy the links to these pages and just paste them over it. So by typing on your keyboard with Command L on Mac or Control L on Windows, or alternatively by clicking on the three dots in the top right corner here, you can copy the link to a page, and then you can just go over any of these words that you've typed and paste it, and now you have this very simple navigation. That's option 1. Option 2 would be to just, instead of typing something out, to just type the add command and then searching for the actual page that you want. So like add navbar, right? We can also do like this, and then we get the whole page, including that icon. Depends a bit which look you prefer. That's option 1 for these navbar things. And the other alternative would be to have it instead of here on the top, on the side, right? So again, if we turn on full width on this page, and we get our columns that we already talked about a few times, and now maybe a clean call out here on the side, then we could get just our navigation below each other here, right? So we could say home, Teams, my workspace, and then again, like resize this column to be small, and then drag everything that you want on the other side and create it like that. And of course, add onto this as you want. You could use this method, right, with linking the page, of course, here, or you can have like buttons stacked below here to jump to every section. No matter how you created navbar, it definitely makes sense to have like this one visual element on every single page. And I'll share with you later a tip to make sure that it always looks the same and that you can update it in all places at once. Tip number 25. Set up default icons, font, and full or small width for all your pages in Notion. Remember earlier I mentioned that you always have to make these settings per page, and there's no general way to apply them to all pages, but there is a workaround. And well, here's that workaround. You should keep all your pages in a database. That's anyway better for organization, and I'll share with you in a bit why that's the case, but it's also much easier than to apply a specific aesthetic. And that's by using Notion's database templates. So if we create a page in here, of course, like it just looks like any other page, right? So we have any other page. And if we open it, we see, well, there are none of the settings applied. So if we want to change our font, we would need to do that individually. But what we can do is we can now go here and on this toggle, say new template. And here, my default page look, you can name this whatever you want, right? This has like no impact on the way it works. And then we can go in here on the three dots and say, well, I always want the mono look and I always want it full width. And then while we're at it, we could also add an icon if we say we always want the same type of icon for these pages, right? Let's say we always want that arrow, and then we can click out of it. And now if we apply these settings, these template settings to that page, I mean, any other page already has a look. Let's create a new one. So new page. Let's open that one and say, okay, my default page look, you see it changes to that mono look. And of course, we don't have to even click every single time. We can click on this drop down here and say, well, make this the default for all of the pages. And then whenever we add like a third page, for example, and we open it, we see that these settings have already been applied. It's the specific look and it's full width, and we don't need to do that manually every single time. So speeds up your process a lot. So that's one of the many reasons why you should always keep all your pages in a single database. Tip number 26 for better looking Notion workspaces is to embed your favorite tools. No matter which other tools you use in your tech stack, chances are you can bring them back to Notion for this one central place to work with. Let's take, for example, rows, an amazing spreadsheet tool. If you have any charts in here that you want to then showcase in Notion, you can simply click on the three dots to embed and then copy that embed link. And this process will work for a lot of your tools. So just try it out and see what all you can embed. And then in Notion, you simply paste that link, pick the create embed option, and after a second, you then have your live updating information from that other tool in here. With some tools, it even goes one step further and you can authorize your Notion account to access specific parts. So for example, if I have a Figma design file and I want to show that in Notion, I can, after I identify myself once, paste my Figma files as previews, and here I see immediately that file. I can jump in, I see when it was last modified, and so on and so on. So whatever process you have will depend a bit. For example, for Whimsical or these whiteboard tools, you can often even scroll around on the whiteboard once you embed it in Notion, and that just really amps up again the quality of your Notion workspace and how pretty it looks. Tip number 27 is about using Notion with style. Now, style is actually part of Notion's recent formula update. And if you're thinking, hold on, we're talking about Notion aesthetics, not about complicated formulas, well, wait a second. Thanks to this new formula operator, you can make the information in your databases look a lot prettier. Because remember again earlier I told you that there's not really a way to apply colors to your databases? Well, besides the workaround I already shared with you, there's a second way thanks to style. And to do so, we need to create a formula property, but don't worry, it's super simple. So let's click on the plus icon, let's type formula in here, and then let's say, okay, let's just call this pretty display. And then when we go to the formula edit options, one thing that we can do is we can type style. And as we can see, the style formula allows us to apply all the other stylings that we can usually apply to text. So we can bold things, we can underline it, but we can also apply text colors or a background to any type of text in the formula. And here we have two options. We can either just type some text in, so we open our brackets, and then in quotation mark, we can just add any text, so any text you like, and close it. Then type a comma, and now we can add all the style types that we want. So let's just say we want to bold this, then we have a small b, and we have a small underline, right? And we separate each style element by a comma and wrap it in quotation marks, and then we close everything off. We click on done. And now we see we have here any text you like, and it's bold and it's underlined. We can, of course, instead of just like adding a text directly here, pull in text from another property. And for that, we simply go here on the side and we see all the properties. Here we only have our name property. So let's take that one and then apply the styling, and we see, okay, use Notion with style. Okay, that looks pretty similar because it's already here by default bolded and underlined, but let's actually change the color. So in order to do that, we again type comma, and then for the colors, we can just say, well, please make this red. And we close it off, and now we see we have a red announcement. And we could then add also background, and for our background, we want to add the color, and then underscore, and then background, and then close it off. And now we see we have Notion with style with our background and the red color. And of course, you can do this in any other variation. You can do that with numbers. You can do that with different text that you combine in your formulas. But it really helps you to create these nicer displays inside your databases and introduce some much needed style into your layout. Tip number 28 is about the most radical way that you can change the look and feel of your Notion workspace. Typically, I would recommend that you use Notion's desktop app because it's the fastest way to use Notion. But if you really want to change everything about the way Notion looks, then you might want to start using it in your browser. More specifically, in the Arc web browser. That's been my favorite browser for a long time now. It's my daily driver. And one of the really cool things that it allows you to do is to change the look of pretty much any website through something called boosts. So here I have opened the Notion page in Arc. And in my sidebar, if I hover over Notion, I can click here on page settings. And here I can activate a boost. And with these boosts, I can now change, well, pretty much anything. Remember, we have 3 different fonts in Notion by default. Well, with Arc, we have a lot more options. For example, I can go for this very crazy font, or if I just want something bolded and slightly more rounded, I could go for that. And as you can see, right, we have a lot more different options to get a lot more custom and a lot more granular about the look that we want. Not just that, we can also change the color of a page. So up here we have this color wheel, and if I start moving these around, everything change. So we don't just have dark and light mode, but we can, well, do whatever tint we want for our setup. And a lot of these will actually look pretty horrible, so you need to look around, right? I probably don't want this like super low contrast look here in the end, so it would require a bit of playing around. In here, I would also then recommend to actually go to dark mode, because that makes it a lot easier than to create these like nice tints, right? So this looks a lot better than the light version of it. And yeah, these type of customizations you just don't get with a normal app. Whether it's good or bad, I'll leave it up for you, but it is a pretty fun party trick. Now, another thing that you can do with these boosts is you can actually completely remove certain UI elements through zapping them. So if I click on zap here, my cursor changes and I can actually highlight different elements on the page. And if there's something about Notion that always annoyed you and you don't actually want to see, well, you can highlight it. Let's say, for example, I work on my own, so I will never ever use this like comment feature at the top here. So I can click on that and then I can click on zap this and it disappears. You see, it's just not there anymore. I could also remove page history. I don't recommend doing that, but again, you could. And you could also remove the whole top bar altogether if you don't want to see that ever again in Notion, right? Same here in the settings. If you don't want to have this upper part of the settings, you can, again, zap this and start like building out this thing until Notion looks exactly the way you want it. Again, this can get quite dangerous quite quickly if you remove relevant UI elements, but still, if there are like, certain little tweaks that you want to do here on any other web page for that matter, you can use these built-in boosts to do so. You can also write your own code if you know how it works, or change a few of the other settings, and then you can save that as a boost, and whenever you open Notion, it will apply these settings to the look. Last but not least, let's talk about organizing your sidebar in Notion. Now, fair warning, in this workspace, my sidebar looks horrible, but that gives us a great opportunity to organize it better. So let's actually show it. We can always click here on the side to actually show our sidebar permanently, or we could click on here to create this like floating sidebar that only pops up when we go to the site. But let's have it permanently here for a moment. And as you can see here, I just have everything stacked as like these first level pages. It looks horrible. I won't find anything. It looks really, really cluttered. Now, the first thing that I would recommend doing is to create a new central page and start moving all your other pages inside it. And you can think of that a little bit like creating a folder on your desktop and then start moving things inside there instead of having all your files directly on your desktop. So let me quickly do that. We create the HQ here, and then I will move all these pages in here. Now I sorted everything out and moved everything either in HQ or Learn Notion, and as you can see, the sidebar looks a lot better. And just like with this more traditional folder structure, you could just open up a toggle and that would expand it and show you all the pages inside. So that means you could create several of these top level pages to organize your documents. I would actually recommend that you use a database, but we'll talk about that later in the functionality section. This one is purely about aesthetics, and this layout definitely looks a lot better than what you had before. Now, two more quick things here. You can, of course, like just rearrange them by dragging and dropping here in the sidebar. And you can favorite any page, right? So for example, if like the smart Christmas list in Notion is super important to me and I want to see that more easily in the sidebar, I can pin it by clicking on the star icon. And now I have this new section in my sidebar, the favorites. This is also particularly great if you work with teams, because while the rest of the sidebar is shared between everyone, so if you rearrange things here, that applies to everyone, right? If you move all pages into HQ, like the pages are moved for everyone into HQ, but the favorite section is unique to everyone, so everyone can pin their own documents to better organize this part of Notion. Now on to functionality. Here are the best tips to help you build really cool stuff in Notion. Tip number 30, anchor links in Notion. This is an easy one to warm us up for the functionality section. Now, in Notion, every element is a block, and every single block has its own URL. And that means you can use this URL to quickly jump to a different page section. So let's say we want to create, one of these back to the top buttons for a particularly long page. All we need to do is copy the link of the first block on the page. So we click here on 6 dots and we say copy link to block. Then I will scroll to the very bottom of the page, and we can here first create our 2 columns, and then on the right side, right, just like to stick with this usual aesthetic of web pages, say back to the top, and then we can paste that link on top of it. And now if I click on it, it will, bring me back to that block on the top. So I jump back up and I build this super simple functionality thanks to anchor links. Tip number 31, start using synced blocks. Synced blocks are a super cool feature in Notion that allow you to have the same content in different places, and if you change it in one location, it will change everywhere. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say we have this nav bar, right, that we built earlier, and we want to make sure that whenever we update it in all places at once, so we don't have to go into every single page and change it. In order to do so, let's type synced for synced block, and add it here. And now you see I get this red outline around this one line. And everything inside this red outline is a sync block. And I can move everything in here if I wanted to, right? So I can have several elements in here. So I just drag them into it. And I could also like have a heading if I wanted to. But for now, let's leave it at that. And then I click on copy and sync. And now I can paste it anywhere else. I can paste it, of course, on the same page or on a different page. And oops, let's just add it here. Have now two of these elements. And if I change something here, so like our even better page is now slightly worse page, you see it changes in both locations. And if we were to create another page, so let's say, okay, another page in our system, and we want to add our navigation bar to the very top, we can just paste the link again, and there we have it. And it's synced everywhere across. So again, if I change something here, it will change it everywhere. Now, if you hover over your sync block, you can also see that you added it in like how many other locations, and you can just jump to the original or like other pages where it shows up. And you can always stop syncing a different element, right? So if you, for example, don't want to make modifications to this specific navigation bar that should not reflect on anything else, you can click on the three dots and click on unsync, and that will stop syncing it. So now if I change this to somewhat secret stuff and go back to my main page, you see it hasn't changed because we stopped the syncing. Tip number 32 is about getting Google Calendar into Notion. Now, unfortunately, there's still no easy way to really sync Notion with Google Calendar, but at least you can see your calendar in Notion if you so choose. In order to do so, head on over to Google Calendar, click on the three dots next to the calendar that you want to integrate with Notion, and then click on Settings and Sharing. Now, for this to work, you need to make your calendar available to the public. So you need to check this Make Available to Public checkbox, confirm the warning, and then scroll down until you see Integrate Calendar, the public URL to this calendar. You then want to copy this, head back to Notion, and paste this in here and choose Create Embed. And this allows you to now see your calendar in Notion in this, granted, not too pretty layout from Google. Now here, because I only set to show busy or private, it only shows that. But if you go back to your settings again and make sure that the public can see not just free and busy, but all the details, you would also then see that in Notion. That's option 1. Now, this is not the prettiest option, and you can use other providers like, for example, Indify to make it a bit more aesthetic if you so choose. In order to do that, you want to sign into Indify and then click on Add a new widget. Then choose Google Calendar, give it a name, My Best Calendar, click on Continue. And then on the next screen, once it has loaded, you need to sign into your Google account to connect it. I will quickly do that now. And now I can customize my calendar and the look that I want here on the side, right? So I could change this to a different event color if I upgrade to the paid plan, or I could change the week view, month and day view. And then once I'm happy with how it looks, I can go down and I can click on copy this link. I can again head on over to Notion and I can just repeat the same process, paste it here, create an embed, and now I have this slightly different look of my Google Calendar in here. Tip number 33 is about master databases and linked views. Now, in my opinion, this is the most important tip of the whole video. So, if out of the 99 things in this video, you only do one thing, make it this one. The problem that most people run into is when they first start using Notion, they treat it like they are used to from Google Sheets or Google Docs and create a lot of different pages and then on these pages record information. For example, you could just type / to do, right, and then write down your different tasks, right? Task A, task B, task C. Now, that's not the best way to do it, of course, and soon people migrate to instead using databases. So instead of just writing the task down like this, they will type a /, they will create a database, and they will call it tasks, and then they will enter like a few tasks here, right? So we have task 1, we have task 2, and we have task 3. Now, the big issue that often happens is that people don't stick to one task database. Instead, they will create several ones, right? So you might have 3 different projects, and then you create different pages, right? So you might say, okay, I have personal, I have and professional, right? Let's just make this differentiation. We have 2 different areas. We turn both of these into pages, and then on each of these pages, we create a different task database, right? So we have tasks here, and we have tasks on the other database, on the other page, so here. Now, the problem with this approach is that we have no way of combining our different tasks, right? We have they are both in isolated silos. If I have like task 3, task 4, and task 5 in here, there's no way to easily see them together with the other tasks unless I create a different view. We have both of these databases. If I want to customize these pages and these databases, I need to do that in two different locations, right? Let's say I actually want to add a due date. I need to click here now to add a date property, and then I need to go to the other page to create a date property because it's not in sync, right? So I create another date property here. So it's a lot of work, and it's risks that we keep defragmenting our information and won't be able to find it again. So instead, what you should definitely do is for every type of information, right? Task would be one type of information, property would be another type of information. You create one database and one database only. So there should only be one task database in your whole workspace. You can add all your tasks in there. And then instead of, if you want to differentiate between personal and professional, you can simply create here a select field and call this type, and then have your private tasks and your professional tasks just labeled like this. And then in the next step, you can go in here and instead of, showing, so let's say, okay, this is like a private task and these two are professional. Just let's quickly add that. And then we can go to our personal page if we want to create a dashboard for it and create a linked view, right? So instead of creating a new database on this page, we type /create to create a linked view of a database. And we pull in our tasks view that we have here. And now on this page, we can create a filter and say, well, on here, please only show me tasks where the type is private. And we get now the same result, right? The same benefits of having like this one page where we have all our personal tasks, but on the back end, they live in one master task database. So I can go and look at all my tasks in one place, and I can slice and dice the information in a lot of different ways. And to take this one step further, I would argue that you should not only have like only one database for all these, big parts like tasks or projects, but you should also have one database that contains all the pages in your Notion workspace. So remember, in our HQ, we just tidied it up and removed all our pages here in the bottom. Well, I created now a database in here that I call pages, and I will move all the different entries that were before living in my sidebar into this database. And that has one big advantage. Moving forward, whenever you create a new page in your Notion workspace, you will create it in this database. And that means A, all your pages are in one location and you can easily find them. And B, you can categorize them, right? If you have pages just like this in your Notion workspace, well, there's no way to add any sort of information to them. But if they're in a database like that, you could add any type of information, right? So for example, if we have private and professional pages like this, we can easily categorize our pages. If we want to record another information, like for example, maybe we want to create a checkbox and we want to call this, our short list of pages that we currently use all the time, we can do that, and then we can check it for the pages that do, and then create a link view somewhere else and say, well, here now show me only my pages, right, where I have a filter, and that's the filter I set for the short list to be checked. And this is, again, only possible if you move all your pages in a database, and will really streamline the organization of your whole workspace. In particular, if you have later hundreds of pages, make it so much easier to organize everything. Now, one word of warning, one thing that won't work with databases is to keep another database directly in it, right? So if you have, let's say we create here another page, and this would be a table, right? So a new database, let's call this test database. One issue that you will run into is if you try to move this one now into the other database, that doesn't work, right? You only get the option to drop it into another page, not into the database itself. That's because Notion databases currently can't store another database, but you can simply work around that by creating a dummy page, right? Let's actually call this dummy page, and then moving your database in here, and then move that database that page into your main database to organize everything, right? So one further organization level down. Still, it's worth the hassle because through this, right, it's so much easier to organize all of your stuff, and you should never just create random pages in different locations because otherwise you lose them. Tip number 34 is still about master databases, but it expands the concept with two very important things. The first part is that you should keep your master databases always as full pages. Now, what do I mean with that? In Notion, when you create a database, you have two options for it. You can either just in another page type / and then database, and that creates an inline database, right? Nothing wrong with that. Let's call this projects. The second option to create a database is to type /page, and then on this new page, right, projects 2, let's call it, pick the table option, and here new database, and now you also have a database. Now, they behave exactly the same way, right? You can add things in them, you can add the same properties, you can add filters and sorts. The main difference is that if a database is a full page database like here, you can't add anything around it, right? I can't click in this empty area below to type something. The only thing I can do is add a small description. Then I have, some text here, but that's it, right? I can't add any of the other typical Notion elements here. Whereas if I have a page and then inside an inline database, I can of course add everything around, right? I could have a heading above, I could have some dividers or some images below. And that means you might think, well, it makes a lot more sense to have them inline because I get a lot more functionality. Well, yes and no. The problem if you have your database inline, and in particular, if you then A, hide your database title, and B, often use linked views, that is that you might accidentally delete your main information, right? Let's say we have like project, and project in here, and then we have on the same page, we create now a linked view, right? A linked version of our database, and we take our projects, and we see we have the same information. And this one, we display as a gallery just to have like some different look. So we have two different ways to see our information. If we later now decide to redesign it and we say, okay, well, actually we don't need these two different views. We'll delete one of them. If we delete the original one, this one, everything is gone, right? This contains the main information. If this is deleted and is removed from the trash, then all the information in our database is gone. And we don't want that to happen. So that's why I would recommend to always create your master databases as a full page database like this, so that you never confuse them with an inline linked view, and then create a separate location in your workspace where you move all of them into. So I would actually recommend right in your sidebar where you have your HQ and then your other top level pages that you should have one page that is called backend. You can add a nice backend emoji to it. I like the servers for that. And then move all your master databases in here, right? So my pages database that currently lives here would be moved in there. And to do so, I just click on the 6 dots and then I say, well, move to the backend. And then I would go to what other pages did we create? We just had our projects database, right? So here as well, we can also click on these 3 dots, say move to, and at the top here, move to the backend. And that way we know, well, all our databases are in one location, and in here they are all as inline as full page databases. In order to do so, if it's inline, we can click on the 6 dots and say, well, turn it to page. And that way, right, we have them all organized neatly in one place. We don't risk accidentally deleting them. And yeah, we can find them very easily. Tip number 35 is about setting up master views. What exactly is a master view? Well, a master view is basically a template for how you want to look at your database. Let's look at these examples. Here we have our backend, of course, in one of these sample workspaces, and we have a bunch of master databases. And if you look, for example, at the task database, we see that here I have set up a range of views. We have my task, which is filtered to only show my task, delegated task, which are my tasks that I've assigned to someone else, my done tasks, and so on and so on. Now, if I'm now anywhere else in my workspace, and for example, I set up a new dashboard, right? So let's say we create a page here and we call this new dashboard. And now I want to, look at my tasks on this dashboard. I type /create, right, to pull in my linked view of a database. I select my tasks, and now I get here a pre-selection of all the views that I created on this master database. Right? So instead of having to set up a view again from scratch, I can just say, well, I want this my week view, which is automatically set up to show me only my tasks. Right? If I look at the filters are all already loaded in, and it shows me that one specific layout. So basically, master views allow you to set up a view once on your master database and then use it anywhere else in your workspace with just a click instead of having to go through the setup from scratch, right? If you don't set up these views on your master database, what you need to do is, you need to say link view of database, you pick tasks, you have to pick new empty view because you don't have any options here, right? And now you need to set everything up from scratch. You would need to go to the calendar, you would need to say, well, do it by week, and then you would need to set up the filters manually. Takes a lot of time, so instead of doing that, create on your master database the main views that you will have to use again and again throughout your workspace and save yourself a ton of time. Notion tip number 36 is about leveraging filters, sorts, and view types. Now, I realize this one should have come before the previous tip, but we just roll with it. This is how you can make sense of your database if you have a lot of information in them. So let's just take this one as a sample. We have a task database and we have a ton of different properties with information that we record about a task. For example, the context, what project it belongs to, and the due date. Now, if we always look at all these entries, this can get overwhelming really quick. I mean, now we just have a few tasks in there, right? But just let's pretend that we have actually a lot more in there, right? It's a long list and we would need to review them all at all time. That is clearly not feasible. So what do we do instead? We create different views to help us cut through the noise. And in order to do so, we can always click on the plus button, right? If we don't have any views here, I already have a bunch. So I would need to click on 7 more and then click on add view. And that gets us a clean view. And we can just name this, right? So let's call this clean view. And the first thing that we can do is we can pick one of 6 different layouts. Right? That's the amazing thing about Notion databases. We can show the same information in different ways. We can show them as a table, but we can also show them as a board, as a timeline, a calendar, a list, or a gallery. Now, I will go into a lot more details in my full database tutorial linked in the description, but basically they're all different ways, right, how you can visualize your information. So for a very clean and minimal look, we might want to go for a list and then click on done. The next thing that we can do is, let me actually just turn off the group because that might be a bit confusing for now. We now have just our very clean list, right, with all tasks. Now, the next thing that we can do is we can create a filter to actually only show certain information. Now, when creating a filter, I would always recommend to create an advanced filter because that's much easier to go through all the setup steps. So let's click on add advanced filter. And then here we can, well, first set the property that we want to filter. So if I click on task, right, I see all the properties in my database. So let's say I want to filter for importance. Then you have the operator, right, which will give you a few options like is not, is empty, or is not empty. So if I click on is empty, I will only see the task where I have no importance filled. But instead of that, I want to see, well, everything where the importance has 3 chilies. And now I see it filtered down for the few tasks that have, well, 3 chilies. I could again, after I set up my filters, go one step further and create a sort, right? And say, okay, within these tasks, please sort them by the created time, right? I want to see the task that I created last, so descending at the very top, and then have that here as well. Now you can of course combine filters and sorts, right? You can add several filters. So I can say here, okay, importance is 3 chilies. And I also want to show only tasks where the due date, let's say is empty, right? Okay, no tasks are empty. So that wasn't the best example. Maybe the due date is within the next week, anything of these setups, right? And then combine it also with different sorts to cut down this like big list of information in exactly the way I want to see it. Tip number 37, month view versus week view. Now, if you decide to show your information as a calendar, right? So again, 3 dots under layout and then calendar, you have 2 ways to display the information. Either as a month view, right? Where you see all the tasks that you have for a month, or, and that's a very new and recent update, as a week. And in order to switch that, you click on the 3 dots and then go on calendar. And here you see show calendar by, and then you can pick the date property by which you want to sort it, and then show calendar as, and you can switch between month and week. So if I just look at my week, I only see the entries for the week. Nothing is in today's week, but if I switch to next week, we are in March 2024. That's maybe where it doesn't show anything. Now we're today, right? And we see our tasks only for that specific week. Now, one drawback with the week view is that we still don't have any hours in here, right? So it's not sorted by, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. These options are not yet available. Hopefully it comes in the future, but at least we have now this nicer week view where we can just drag and drop tasks, just like in the calendar, to only see the next 7 days. Speaking of week, if you want to change what day of the week your calendar starts on, you can do so if you click on the settings and members option, and then you go to language and region, and here you can say, well, start week on a Monday, toggle it on or toggle it off to decide whether it's a Monday or Sunday that you want to start your week with. Tip number 38, the group feature. Now, the group feature is a bit similar to filters and views, and that allows you to make more sense of the data in your databases by, well, grouping information together. So let's say we have here our wiki and we want to show all type of documents that are the same type together. So in order to do that, we could of course just like sort it by, let's say, the type, and that would get the trick done. But that way we don't have like a clear visual distinction between the different groups. So another thing that we could do is we could click on the 3 dots and then under group say, well, please group it by, and then we can choose whatever property you want to group it by. And in this case, we want to group it by type. And once we have that toggled on, you see now on the side we get these little toggles in our database. We have node type, then we have the documentation, and we see, okay, 21 items here. And once we scroll to the end of it, we have this like slight visual separation. It looks like a new database is starting, but it's still the same, just grouped. And now we have our SOPs, and we can of course like also like collapse them if we wanted to, right, to make it even easier to look at things. And it's overall just super useful. Now, a few more things about grouping. If you are in here, you can either say, well, sort manual, and that way you can like actually change the order. So I can say, well, SOPs should be at the top, or you can say, well, alphabetical or reverse. And one very useful thing, you can hide empty groups so that this node type one, right, and other empty ones disappear, and we actually only see the relevant information. Tip 39, easy progress bars in Notion. There used to be a time where it was actually fairly complicated and you needed long formulas to create progress bars in Notion, but nowadays it's super simple. As soon as you have a number property in your Notion workspace or in your database, you can get a progress bar. And to do so, just click on the property and then say edit property. And first, you can then actually change the number format, right? So if you don't want to display this as point and instead of as percent, you could like easily do that. But then the magic happens where it says show as, right? You can show it as a number, a bar, or a ring. And just by changing to it, you change automatically to a progress bar and can, then modify the way this one is supposed to look with the color and then whether you want to also see the number or not. And this allows you to super quickly, based on your calculations, create this progress view. Notion tip number 40, creating your own task manager using filters. Actually, with the help of filters and sorts and databases, you can build pretty much any application you want in Notion, but a task manager is a great starting point to understand the concepts. So, what would we need for it? Well, of course, a database. So we start with typing /database and adding a database here. And in this case, it's inline. You would, of course, later move it as its own page right into the backend, but for the building part, this is enough. Let's call this tasks. And tasks, of course, have, well, tasks. So let's just change the name of the first property here. And if we want, we can also swap out this property here for an icon that more reminds us of tasks. So probably like some sort of a check mark. Great. Now, the second thing a task typically has is a due date. So let's change this default tag property to a date property and quickly call this our due date. Like so. And then last but not least, for this like very, very simple task manager, we need of course something to indicate whether it's done or not, right? That's the essential part about a task manager, being able to cross things off our list. So in order to do that, let's add a simple checkbox and call this done ? Now, you remember maybe from earlier, we can actually resize this to be super tiny and move it to the front of our database just to create this, different visual look. And yeah, now we have all the elements that we would need. And we could of course like create our task 1, task 2, and task 3 in there as sample tasks. Now, here's where the filters come in, because now what you can do is you can create filters on your views in order to create the same behavior that you would expect from a normal task manager. So typically what you would assume, right, is that once we tick something off, it disappears from our list. So in order to do that, we can go to filter, add advanced filter, and then say, well, whenever done, our checkbox property is checked, we want to see it. So here we would now only see tasks that are done. Well, that's actually probably the wrong way around. So let me just go back to the filter and switch that to, well, we only want to see things that are unchecked on this view. So now if I say, well, task 1, that has been done, I can click it, check it, and it disappears. Now, the only other thing that we would need to do for our task manager is maybe like a view for our done tasks, right? So we can actually like quickly rename this here to open tasks. And then we could create a second view. Now, if we want to create a second view, we can either just click on the plus button and go through all the setup steps, or we can simply right-click Open Tasks, say Duplicate, call this Done Tasks in the name, and then just change our one filter that we applied from unchecked to checked. And now we have one view for our Open Tasks and one view for our Done Tasks. This is how easy it is to build your own task manager in Notion, or pretty much again like any type of application. And then by adding these filters in, you can create a whole workflow like you would do it in a normal app. Notion tip number 41, using Notion filters to pre-fill information. Now, there's another really cool thing that filters in Notion do. And that is that you can use them to automatically add information to your entries. Whenever you set a filter on a Notion database, Notion will then try to fulfill that filter if you add something new to that database. What exactly does it mean? Well, let's look at our open task again, right? So this is the same database as before, just added like these two columns. And now I will go in and modify this filter to not only show me the tasks that are, unchecked, but also tasks where the due date is today. So in the rule, I will add another one. And this time we will say the due date should be, is, and then have today. So now nothing is shown, right? None of the tasks that we had in there had today's due date. But look what happens now if I add a new entry. I click in here and say, okay, maybe today's task. And you see automatically it has filled out the due date as December 19th, 2023, the date of recording. So whenever you set any of these filters and then add an entry through the view where that filter is, then Notion will add all the corresponding properties that you need so that it actually shows up on that view. We can actually test that by adding another property just to see here. So we could say, okay, let's add here a select and let's maybe call this tag, and then we add, we could say, okay, this tag property, maybe we use that to indicate whether something is, takes long or not. So we could say, okay, high energy and low energy as our two options here. All right, and now again, we can modify our filter and say, well, I only want to see today's tasks that are, high energy. So again, we add another filter on top of all of these and say tag is high energy. And again, right, all the entries disappear because nothing is in here that currently fulfills it. But if I add a new result, like high energy task, you can already see it here on the side. We filled now both due date and the tag high energy. And this is super, super useful because you can use it to create these quick entry boxes for Notion. So instead of having to fill out all the properties all the time, you can create different views where it says, okay, well, if anything is in here, it should have these three properties filled out, and then pre-fill the properties correspondingly. So again, super, super powerful to speed up your workflows in Notion. Tip number 42, creating an inbox using impossible filters. So this is another really cool application to use filters on your databases if you want to create this sort of inbox look on your dashboard. Because sometimes you don't want to see the whole database, right? You just want to have an easy and quick way to enter new information to a database. And one of the ways that you can do that in a very clean and minimal look is to set a filter that is impossible to fulfill. Now, what is a filter that's impossible to fulfill? Well, for example, it could be a filter that says, let's just create a new property in here and we get the created time as well. We can hide it in the view, we don't need to see, we just need for the filter. And now in our filter, we add another one. We actually don't need any of the others, but we just leave them here for now. And we say, okay, our filter should be that created time is, and then we say like 1 month from now, right? So 1 month in the future. Now, this is obviously impossible, right? The created time can never be currently in the future. So that means this database will always be empty, which means you get now always this fairly clean look where you can just click on the plus button and you can add a new result, right? So you could say, okay, this is like a quick entry task. And you see, it doesn't even appear here on this view. So it just quickly pops up, you can create it, and then it will disappear again. Now, in order to make this even more minimal, what you could then do is to go in here, right, and say, well, actually the layout should be a list because that's a lot cleaner, as you can see, than the database one. That's one of the two options. The other one would be to switch it to a gallery. That's also nice if you want like this big new button here. So these are the two options that you would typically go for. And now, yeah, you can just also like, rename this, so our inbox, and just use this to quickly add new information. Now, one last thing that's of course important, the auto application of filters still works here, right? So in our use case here, whenever we would add something to this inbox, it would set the due date to today and tag to high energy. So if you don't want that, right, if you want a neutral inbox that doesn't apply any of these presets, then you would of course need to remove these filters. But now, yeah, you just have this minimal part, and you could of course like create again 2 columns, right? And then just on the right of your page somewhere have a small heading that says inbox, add that to it, and then design the rest of the page as you want. And you just have this nice floating button here that you can click to quickly add a new entry. Notion tip number 43, get creative with how you use the select property. Now, the select property is not just there to apply tags to your entries. You can also use it to create these like cool board-like structures where things, for example, have an entry on according to the day of the week. And you could use it in this week planner and this meal planner, right, to plan out your different meals for the different days. Or you could use it to schedule out your tasks in a very simple way ahead of time. And of course, any other way where you have like the structure of several, bullets or pillars, and then you can add entries to it. And doing so is super simple.
all you need to do is add your different entries to the select field, right? So I modified our select property that we had before and just added like the different days in here. And then you can switch the view over from a table to a board view. So let's go layout and then let's go board. And in the board view, we want to make sure that we group it by the right entry, right? So if you have different properties, you could group it by different things. You could group it also by whether it's done or not, but that's not too helpful. So make sure it is here correct. And then we want to order them the right way, right? So we want to have Monday at the front, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, perfect. And we can even like color the columns if we like so. And now we have here our different weekdays, and we can easily move our task between them to create like this very, very easy scheduling part. And of course, if we add something to one of the columns, it will automatically inherit that tag without us having to fill it out. Notion tip 44, add information quickly using a button. Another way to quickly add information to any of your databases is through buttons, and they are super, super simple. So you just type /button. And then in here, you get, again, like the options of what it can do. And this time we want to use the option add page to create a new entry. And then it will ask us to select the database where we want to add our new entry. So in our case, we want to add it to the tasks database that we just created here. And now we can add any information that we want, right? So probably when we hit a button, we don't want to give the task a specific title unless, that button is only for one type of tasks. But we might want to add some other edit some other properties. So we could say, for example, that whenever we add one, we want to have the due date for the current time, right? So it allows us to pick a fixed date. That, again, is probably not the most helpful one, but we can dynamically insert the date of when that button is clicked. So let's use that. And then the last thing to do is to name up here our task. So we could say, okay, let's get a checkbox and then say add new task for today. And then we can click on done and can close it. And now you see if I hit this button, it will add a new task down here, an empty one, right? Because we don't have any task name and with the current due date already filled out. Now, typically what you would want to do in these situations is that you would probably want to open this entry here so that you can further edit it. So in order to do that, we can go back and we can add another step and we can say, please open a page and open the page that we just added, right? Our new page added. And we can say, well, how do we want to add it? Like side peek, center peek, full page. Usually I prefer the side peek. And then again, we can do this and add a new task for the day. And now we get this option here, okay, new task. Now, of course, this isn't the most helpful if you have the database right below the button and you could just, click something on the database. But in particular in the example where you might not have this on here, right? If this is actually turned into, a page and you actually moved it into your backend, like I showed you previously, you might have a dashboard where you just want to quickly, use one of these buttons on a very different type of page to quickly add a task for the day. And then it's super helpful. Tip number 45, speed up your workflow with database templates. Database templates are incredibly powerful in Notion. We briefly touched on them in the aesthetic section, right, as a way to always have the page full width or to always apply a certain type of font, but they can do a lot more than that. So let's go back to our tasks. And let's say we have specific routine tasks. For example, in my case, I might have to always film a YouTube video. So let's say new YouTube video as the title for our template. Now, when you edit a template in Notion, you will always get this banner at the top that tells you, well, you're actually not editing an entry in tasks, you're editing the template. And that's super helpful just to remember, okay, what am I actually doing, template or entry? Now, you can always then say, well, always apply the same type of icon, right? So I might want to say, okay, whenever it's a video, I always want this as the icon. And we can say, well, maybe a film video is always on Wednesday, so it should already be applied. And besides presetting these database properties, right? So they work similar to the filters that we touched on before. Whenever I create now a new template, it will automatically have this icon and this tag. But I can go one step further and can create automatic content in the body of the page. So for example, for a YouTube video, I always need to do a few things, right? I need to brainstorm a thumbnail. I need to come up with a title, and I need to write an intro. And if I have to always do these steps and I have some other context to them, I can add them to the body of the page and already structure it for me when it's the next time to do so, right? So I quickly add them, then let's actually turn them into headers and maybe say, okay, our reminders, make it pretty and engaging. right? Of course, like if you have like a different step-by-step checklist, you could do that here. So you could have like some lazy to-do lists and say, okay, less than 60 characters, make it interesting, include Notion in the title, right? Whatever it is that your task is, and whatever standard steps you need to go through and you want to remind yourself of, you could use one of these database templates to do so. The sky is your limit. You could of course also have a linked view to a task database, right? So if you have the button, or we could create a linked view to our database. Say, okay, our task database. We want to see our open tasks on here in case we want to directly add our next actions, and so on and so on, right? So let's just make this full view for a second to just look at it. Okay, new YouTube video. It's always on Wednesday, and this is our context here. Perfect. Looks great. Now, if I go now back to the page where I had it initially, and I now click on this drop down, I see, well, I have this new template. And whenever I create now a new task, I have an option to say, okay, well, this is like a new task. I can just open this and now apply the database template like such. And it will automatically load everything in, right? I get the icon, I get the tag, and after a second, I will get the content here also in the body of the page. There it is. Perfect. Now, the other thing that we can do to always apply this template is we could go in here and say, well, make this the default. And default means whenever we create a new entry, it will automatically apply this template, right? So again, we can say new YouTube video by just clicking on this new button, and does exactly the same things. Last but not least, one thing that trips people up sometimes is, well, how can you change your template again? Well, you would need to go in here and then click on the 3 dots. If you click on here, you actually immediately apply it. So like this, you create a new entry. Whereas in order to edit it, you need to click on the drop down and then on the 3 dots and then on edit. Notion tip number 46, using recurring entries. Now, recurring tasks in Notion are still a bit of a struggle, but they've gotten a little bit easier with one of the recent feature releases. And they are recurring entries for your databases. So whenever you're on your database and you click on this drop-down toggle for a template, you might see that if you click on the 3 dots, you can set something as repeat. And this will allow you to add a new entry with that template at a certain interval. So we could say, well, please, I always need to, film a new YouTube video on Wednesday. So I can go in and say, well, please repeat this, and repeat this every week. And we want to repeat it, well, always every single week. We want to repeat it on the Wednesday, right? That's when we have to actually do the task. And we want to start, well, so let's just start tomorrow for this. And then we can also pick the time at which it should be created. And then we can click on save. And now, whenever this gets created, we will automatically add a new entry here. Even better, we cannot just like always create this then with every Wednesday, but we can now also go into our template and say, well, okay, since I know now this will always trigger every week, I want to automatically set the due date as well. So I can go back into edit and say due date is currently empty, right? We're currently not setting a due date here, but I can click in here and I can either set again a fixed date, which doesn't make sense, right? Because that will be outdated fairly quickly. But I could say, okay, give me today's date when it's duplicated. So whenever this is applied, whenever the recurring thing triggers, please fill out the current date. So we will always have the current Wednesday's date here as the due date. Notion tip number 47, connect information using relations. Relations are one of Notion's most powerful features. And if you want to become a true Notion expert, you definitely need to master them. So how do they work? Well, let's say we extended our Notion setup and we now not only have tasks, but we also have projects. And these databases sort of belong together, right? We have our information here and we want to usually connect a task to a project. Now, one way we could do that, of course, is to just create another property in the task database, right? We could just say, well, okay, give me another select field and let's call this projects. And now whenever I have a new project, I will add it in here, right? So, YouTube channel, maybe. And that can work for very simple setups, right? I could say, okay, this is project YouTube channel. Perfect. Very easy. But the problem is now that I can't record any information about this YouTube channel, right? If I want to record information about my project, like for example, what is the priority of a project or what is the timeline for it, I need to create a separate database for them so I can add properties for them, right? So now in this one, I could add here my priority property to record, well, which of these projects is actually important. And that doesn't work if I just do it with another property here. So this here isn't an option. So let's just quickly remove it. But that still leaves us with the issue that we need to somehow connect, the entries here with these entries. And we can do that through relations. So by clicking on the plus icon, I can look for the relation type. And the relation type will always ask me to link this to another database. Now, we can now pick the projects database here and say, well, okay, please create this relation for the project. We can name how it should appear on this one, right? We see this little preview here. We now have like this arrow going from tasks to the project. And typically, we actually also want to show it on the other database. So also on projects, we want to see the tasks, right? In order to do that, we toggle this here on. And now we see this update. So now we will on tasks show the project, and on project, we will show the tasks. And again, you could rename both these entries if you wanted to. Last but not least, you could also like set a limit to say, well, actually, there always will only be one connection. That might make sense, if you're matching students to a mentor or so, and you want to make sure that every student and every mentor only has one partner. But most of the time, you want to probably connect several records so we don't change this. And then we say add relation. And now we have this new property here. And if we scroll up, we actually also get automatically a property on the projects database. And if I click in here on the task database, I see all the entries from the project database as an option. So I can now say, well, okay, please, this is this project. And once I connect it, after a second, you will see that up here for Grow YouTube channel, the YouTube video shows up. And if like quick entry task, right, if that has to do with world domination, and this one here as well, let's just quickly add them, wait a second, and you see now achieve world domination is connected to these two entries. And that's why these relations are so powerful, because they allow you to connect an entry in one database to a different entry. One last thing about relations, you can actually also use relations within the same database. So you don't have to connect two different databases. You can also link one record of one database to another record of another database, right? So for example, if you were to say, okay, maybe for your tasks, you have something that will block something, you could create a relation and say, okay, please relate this to the same database. You get like this info icon here on the side that tells you that. Show that on, again, show two things and say, okay, blocking, right? So the first entry will be blocking and the second one will be blocked by, and then we can add that relation. And now in our task database, we could say, okay, the YouTube video, until that is done, I can't do my quick entry task or my high energy task. So I click in here and I pick high energy task, and now it will show that. And actually, we need to show the other property as well. So we can go in here and show quickly blocked by. And we see, okay, the high energy task we see here, well, this is blocked by the YouTube video. And with that, we can so easily create these connections and the meaning between different entries in database that it really will bring your Notion workspace to the next level. Tip number 48, get information from elsewhere using rollups. Now, once you understand relations, you can move on to rollups, and they will add another layer of functionality into your Notion workspaces. Rollups really can only be understood together with relations. Whereas a relation allows you to connect an entry in one database to an entry in another database, right? So our YouTube video is now connected to this entry here, is connected to this entry there. A rollup allows us to ask Notion to grab us information from the connected entry. So let me show you what I mean. Let's say, for example, on our task database, we want a reminder of how important the project is to us, right? We want to have a quick way to see, well, YouTube video, quick entry task, how do I value these projects? And of course, I could just click into it, right? I could click into Grow Your YouTube channel, and then I can open it and I see, okay, priority 1. It's not as important as achieve world domination, but there's a quicker way to do so. And that has to do with a rollup. So let's add a new property here. Let's call this a rollup. And in the rollup, what we want to see is we want to see the project priority. So that's the name that we give it. And now that we see, we have 3 things to set up. First, we need to set up a relation, because a rollup can always only exist with a relation. It can't exist on its own. So first we need to say, well, which relation should that rollup be connected to? And we want to connect it to our project one, right? The project connection. Next up, it will ask us for a property. And you see it automatically picked the property name, so the name property from our project database, which means it shows you just the exact same thing as the other entry. So that's not very helpful. But we can click in here, and now we can select any property from the project database to show here on our task database. So we want to see the priority. Now we see the project priority on our task database. Last but not least, calculate allows you to display that information in different ways. If you want to actually just pull information from the other place, then show original is what you want to go for. But you have a few options. You could, for example, also count them or show only unique values. But we'll get to that in a second. But for now, we now managed to get here on our task database the information from our projects. And if we change that, right, if we say, well, house renovation, actually, that is only one flame. We actually don't have any connection to it. So let's actually quickly connect our high energy task to house renovations. We see, okay, that has one flame. And if we update it to 3 flames, it automatically updates here as well. That's part one of how you can use rollups. The other part how you can use rollups is you can get information about a whole range of connected things. Let's say here on projects, we want to know how many tasks do we have connected, and we don't want to count them here manually. Well, we could create a rollup here and say, okay, call this number of tasks. Please go to the task relation and then, give me the property tasks, but now don't show me the original, but count all. And now we see, okay, well, here we have for the YouTube video, we have 1, for quick entry task, we have 2, and for high energy task, we have again 1. And we can take this one step further. Let's just duplicate this here quickly so we don't have to set it up from scratch. And now we call this one, progress. And here on the progress, we could now say, well, okay, the relation task, that's right, but don't show me the name property and just count how many names are connected. Look at the done property. And at the done property, don't show me the checkbox, I don't care about that. Show me the % checked. And now I see how far my project has come. So if we take now this new task and check that off, we see that the progress jumps to 50%. So it's an automated way to calculate, okay, how far has this project come based on the connected entries. And of course, since this is a number property, we can actually say edit property and then say, well, please show this as a progress bar and get the automated progress right here without having to write any formulas. That's how powerful rollups can be. Tip number 49, build hundreds of dashboards quickly with self-referential filters. Self-referential filters are probably one of my favorite features in Notion. They're absolutely incredible and they really will help you create a workspace at scale. Now, why are they so great? Let's say we have our projects here and now we want to build a dashboard for each project. On this dashboard, we want to see, for example, all connected tasks. Now, one thing that we could do is we could go manually into every project and set this up. So we could say, okay, open this one. Let's open it as a full page. Let's go in here and let's say, okay, we want, our connected tasks. And in order to do so, we create a linked view to our main task database, tasks. And we want to see the open tasks. And then we hide the title here and we will now update the filter to say, well, only show me the task connected to this project. So we add a filter rule and say, the project should be, well, grow YouTube channel to 10K, right? Okay, grow YouTube channel to 10K. Perfect. And now it filters it down and we see YouTube video and another video and nothing else. And that's okay, but this is super time consuming, right? If we need to set this up for every single project, if we have hundreds of projects, this will take forever. So let's instead do something much quicker. Let's create a template. So let's go in here, we set up a template for this database and we call this, new project template. Let's open it as a full page so we can see it a bit better. And now let's structure the dashboard that we want to see, on most of our projects. Again, connected tasks, create linked view of a database, pick our task database, the open tasks. Let's hide this for a cleaner look and then change our filter. And now you might be wondering, well, okay, but I can't, set the filter for that specific entry. What am I supposed to connect it with? Well, if you now look at project and say the project should contain, you see a new option. You see new project, and that's the name of the template we're currently editing. And if I pick that, at first nothing happens because nothing is connected to this template, right? But the true magic now happens when I apply it, actually. So let's go to achieve world domination. Let's open it up again as a full view, and let's say new project. You'll see that once this has loaded in, it will actually show us only the task that's actually connected, right? Quick entry is the only open task, new task we already checked off. Why is that? Well, the filter automatically updates from the template name to the name of the page where we applied the template. And it updates dynamically, right? If I now change the name from achieve world domination, try number 2, we don't need to change this filter again, right? It automatically updates as well. This is what's called a self-referential filter, a filter that refers to the page it's applied to and will automatically show you everything connected to this page. It's absolutely amazing, in particular if you start using relations at scale with several databases, right? If you had, for example, another database with documents, you could then easily now create below here another thing and say, okay, connected docs, and now link your docs here and have the same setup. And then no matter whether you have 1, 10 or 100 projects, with just one click, create these dashboards with automatically pre-filtered databases. Notion tip number 50, create subtasks in Notion. Once you have your task manager set up, it's super easy to expand it with a new subtask feature. And in order to do so, all you need to do is click on the 3 dots on your task database. The original one or any link view will do. And then go down where it says sub-items. And you want to click on sub-items and then turn on sub-items. And what this does is twofold. First, it will actually create this toggle in front of every single task that you can open up to create a new sub-item. So I could say, okay, for another video, right? So what does this entail? Instead of like having these checkboxes on the page itself, I could say, okay, here, come up with thumbnail, and then we need to, create title, and we would need to also write the intro. Now, one thing to be aware of is that if you set here like a database template as the default for this database, it will apply to every single entry. So also to all sub-items, which in this case, right, doesn't make a lot of sense if we have that YouTube template applied for every single one. So in this case, what I would recommend is that you turn off the default item and instead set a template for every single item individually. Now, how Notion handles this on the back end is actually through a relation. So if you click on the 3 dots and look at the properties in this database, you will see that Notion automatically created 2 new properties, parent item and sub item. And if you actually show them, you'll see that it's exactly the same setup that we had before with blocked and blocked by, just now that we have the parent item and the different sub items. And you see, okay, the sub item here are the different thumbnail parts, and here another video is the parent one for these. Now, you never need to look at them, right? You can hide them, but it's just a good idea to know how something works in the backend if you activate it. Tip number 51, creating dependencies in Notion. This is another add-on for your task manager, and it's actually very similar to the blocked and blocked by thing that we talked about previously, but a bit more baked into the system. So if you click on the 3 dots and again scroll down, you see the dependencies option, and you can turn them on. And when you turn them on, you have 3 options on how these dependencies should behave. Because dependencies means that one task depends on the other one, so you can actually have Notion automatically shift the due date if you change one of the items in the sequence. So the first option is to say, okay, only shift it when the due dates start overlapping. The second option is to say, well, shift and maintain always the time between items, right? So if you always want to start 7 days after the first item is done, then this is the option that you should pick. And the last one is to not automatically shift anything. You can also avoid weekends, which is super, super helpful. And then you can pick which date it should use for the shifting part and whether it should have separate start and end dates or not. So let's turn that on. And again, on the back end, the way this will be handled is through the blocked by and blocking items. And you see, because we already created manually a blocking and blocked by relation, Notion is actually a bit confused and creates like a duplication of that. So in case you want to use, plan on using dependencies, you should not create them manually yourself. Otherwise, you have them with that, number 1 at the back end. So I'll actually go ahead later and we'll delete these. Now let's have actually look at how this works. And the best way to do so is actually on the timeline view, because here we now have this nice thing where we get this yellow. Oops, let's actually expand these tasks a little bit so that we actually have an easier way to look at them. And one thing that you'll see is every single entry has now this yellow dot with a line after the entry. So you see this one. And if I start dragging that, I can drag that to another task to indicate that, well, this task is blocking the next one. So if I say YouTube video is blocking the quick entry task, you see quick entry has been automatically pushed after the task, because we set up in our dependency that whenever it overlaps, please move it. So if I move YouTube video now, by a few days, quick entry task moves as well. And that of course works just the same way if quick entry task is now blocking one of our earlier ones, right? Maybe the high energy task. You see high energy task gets automatically pushed to the end. So through these dependencies, you can then create these longer plans, and when one thing shifts, everything in here shifts. Super useful if you want to do more advanced project management in Notion. Tip number 52, start using if statements to create your own notifications inside the database. Now, this one involves formulas, but trust me, it's a very easy formula and it's a very big unlock for your Notion space. Let's say, for example, you have again your task database and you want to actually display like a status to see, okay, like how much of the information that you need to fill out have you filled out? Or it could be also in a different context, right? Maybe it's a CRM and you have a pipeline, and depending on what certain fields are filled out for a client, you want to display a certain message. Now, doing so is really simple. All you need to do is click on the plus icon and create a new formula property. And then we can call this notification. And then we go on edit to write our formula. Now, what we can do here now is like start adding all the conditions and then display the corresponding information. So let's say here we want to make sure that always the due date is filled, the day of the week is filled, and a project is assigned. And maybe assigning the task to a project is the most important part, so we start with that. So we type if, and with an S, ifs, because we will have several statements. If you only have one if statement, you can use this one. If you have several one, this is easier. And now what we need to do is we need to say, okay, well, so project, if project is empty, please say something. So we type empty, open the brackets and take project, our relation, close it off, and then have a comma and then what it should say afterwards, right? And if you're confused about the syntax, you can always like hover over ifs, and that one, if you are here, it will show you, okay, like this is exactly how you need to set it up. So let's say if the project is empty, I want to print out assign project. Perfect, in quotation marks. Then we can have a comma and we can have the next condition. So again, like if something is empty, this time if like the due date is empty, we want to print out set due date. And last but not least, if the day of the week is empty, we want, that we schedule this actually for like one of the weekdays to work on. Yeah, set day of week. And of course, we could actually combine this with our emoji keyboard, right? So if we hit the connection for the emoji keyboard, we could then say, okay, please for like the assigned project, use this emoji. And then for the due date, let's use the calendar. And then last but not least, for our day of the week, I don't know, let's just let's use the eyes. And then we can click on done. And now we see here, okay, for all of these things, we need to actually set our due date. So I can set a due date here, and let's say I have to do this tomorrow. And once I do that, the notification now changes to set day of the week. So let's say Tuesday. And once all of this is done, it shows nothing right now. So we could actually add a last part on there that gets displayed if everything is good. And we could just have like maybe this this green status like all good. And then click on done again. And now we see, okay, now we're all good here and here. And here we need to assign a project, right? So here we need to start doing that. And again, you can adapt that to whatever situation you have. It could be for filling out specific data, but it could also be for displaying certain other information, right? So for example, when something is overdue, you might want to display a notification. Or if, and with the client example, if the client moves to a certain stage, you want to display a certain notification. It's a really useful way to add additional context to your Notion databases.
Moving on to a personal favorite of mine, efficiency hacks. Once you master these, you'll be using Notion twice as fast. Notion tip number 53, use the / command to quickly add things to Notion. You've seen me use this one a few times already in this video, and if you still add things to Notion by clicking on the plus button, then please stop and start doing this instead. It's so much faster. Just type / and then start typing whatever block it is that you want, right? So if you want a checkbox, you could ask for a to-do list, or a checkbox. If you want a database, just type database. If you need a heading, type heading, and so on and so on. Tip number 54, convert everything into anything with the 6 dots. Since every element in Notion counts as a block, it's super simple to transform these blocks. So all you need to do is click on the 6 dots here and then click on turn into and pick whatever you want it to be, right? Currently it's a text, but I could easily turn it into a heading, or I could turn this other text into an actual page, right? That I can then click into, or last but not least, could turn this into, let's say maybe a call out. Plus, bonus tip, if you have some text and then you have text indented below it, something indented, whatever it is, and you then add something to the first text block, this one will be treated as a child and inherits the same settings. So if this actually says some text is turned into a page, you will see that the other part disappears and now counts as text inside that page. Same if you have like a list, right? It will automatically be indented with the same formatting and so on. Tip 55, learn Notion shortcuts. There are a ton of shortcuts, and I actually created a cheat sheet for you that you can download as part of the Notion starter pack that is linked in the description. But these are the 3 or 4 most useful ones that I definitely recommend you start using. First,
Command P. Command P pulls up Notion's search, so you can quickly jump either to a specific page or to one of the 10 last pages that you actually used. Now, if you're on Windows, it would always be Control instead of Command. Command D allows you to quickly duplicate something, right? So if you just highlight something and hit Command D, you get a copy of these blocks in your Notion. And Command E allows you to create a code highlight to quickly draw attention to some text. Last but not least, you can also flip through database items. So if we open any part of our database and then we hit Control, Shift and K or J, we can easily cycle through a lot of entries, which can be quite useful because again, then you don't have to always click on the next line item. Tip number 56, use Notion Global Search. No matter where you are on your laptop, you can now press Command Shift K to pull up a global Notion search menu and always quickly jump into your Notion deck with just a single click. To activate this, you need to have the Notion desktop app installed. And then in the desktop app, click on Settings and Members, go to My Settings, and then make sure that the command search is toggled on. Plus, you can also customize the shortcut here. Tip 57, use Notion's Q&A to quickly find answers. Now, imagine you had ChatGPT and it got all the knowledge from your Notion workspace. Well, this is what Notion's latest AI feature is all about. All you need to do is press Command P and click on Ask AI in your workspace. And now you can ask it, well, anything. So let's ask it, for example, what are the steps to learning Notion? And what it will do is it will search through your complete workspace and based on, again, the AI models will create an answer based on all the information that it finds. Plus, it will also show you the pages where you can learn more. So see, to learn Notion, start with understanding This is based on the different pages that it found in this workspace. Now, again, you can ask a lot more detailed questions, and if you had a proper knowledge base in your Notion, which I don't have in the Sandbox workspace, you can quickly get all the answers without having, to search for documents forever. So if you don't have Notion AI yet, this is definitely a reason to get it. Tip 58, get a personal time machine with page history. Now, let's presume that we are back at our pretty page for our Notion company and by accident we deleted everything. Not good. Of course, if we catch that mistake in the moment, we can just press Command Z or Control Z to revert all the changes. But let's say we actually didn't catch it in the moment, so things might look dire. Luckily, Notion has a built-in page history. The duration depends a bit on the plan that you're on, but you will always have the option to roll back to previous versions. All you need to do is click in the top right corner on View All Updates. And the first thing you see is that you can now see which user did which changes to the page. You could also look actually at the analytics and see, okay, how many people viewed this page, but we care about the updates. And as you can see, well, someone deleted everything. That's not good. Now, luckily, we can just scroll down to a different version where everything was still fine, right? Like 20 hours ago, things were still good. And we can click on the view version for this update icon and then say, okay, please restore it to yesterday's version at 3:56 p.m. And then we can confirm, and now it will start restoring that page. And there we have it. Everything's back the way it's supposed to be. Plus, bonus tip, if you are using this on the desktop app, you can actually also, when you click on the view version for this page, copy individual elements out of it, right? In the web, that doesn't work, but on the desktop, you can just say, so for example, if you'd only want this part of your page restored, you could just copy that out and paste it into your page and go back to that previous version. Tip number 59, mastering the add command. Have you ever typed add anywhere in your Notion workspace? Well, if you have, you realize that it pops up this nice little context window to do something with a date, a person, or page. First up, dates. You have two options. You can either create a normal timestamp. So let's say I want to create today's timestamp, and this is dynamic, which means if you come back to this page tomorrow, you will see yesterday here. And in a few weeks, you will simply see December 19th, 2023. Now, this is quite useful if you want to remember when exactly you wrote something down. So for example, let's say we create a simple journal page in Notion and we say, okay, my thoughts and then add today. And now I can write down everything in here and I can, come back and create new toggles every day. And then I will always see when I wrote down something specific. The second feature for time is the remind feature. And this one is nice in theory, but in practice it's a bit finicky because you need to actually figure out, okay, how do I exactly write down the syntax so that it reminds me the right time? And even if you have it, you will always only get a notification here, which is easy to oversee. So it's not the most useful feature. What is useful, however, is the option to tag people. So you see I'm here with only myself in this workspace, so not the most useful, but if you're in a workspace with a lot of team members, you can use it to ping them on a page. And this will again also notify them in the update section that you mentioned them somewhere so that they are then prompted to look at something. And last but not least, you can link to pages. And this is probably the most useful part of the add command. You can search for any page. So let's say, right, this, I want to look for my 99 tips for Notion page. So I start typing and it pulls up the search function and shows me every page that, qualifies for that. So let's say I click on it and now I have a link to that page. Or remember, we set up an HQ earlier, so if I want to link to that HQ, I can just type @HQ and then link to that page. And if I click on it, I jump there directly. Super, super useful if you want to build nav bars, if you want to build quick links in your workspace, or if you want to just remember that on a certain page, you're not connected to something else. Tip number 60 is about setting up your Notion iPhone widget. And doing so is super simple. Just long tap your Notion home screen, click on the plus icon in the top left corner and start searching for Notion. Then select Notion and pick the type of widget that you would like to see. In my case, I want to open a specific page. Then drag it wherever you want to see it and then click on Done. And last but not least, tap and hold it to click on the Edit Widget option to then set up the specific page that you want to open whenever you click on it. Tip number 61, doing quick edits in a gallery view. If you display any of your databases as a gallery or as a board, you can actually now quickly edit information right from the screen. And in order to do so, you need to go to the three dots, to the properties, then pick the properties that are supposed to be displayed and be modifiable. So let's say we want to have the due date in here and we want to see the corresponding project select. So either we can simply click into the field, right, if it's already filled out for the due date and then change it there. But also for the ones that don't have it filled out, we can hover over the edit button and that pulls up all the properties that we set to generally display. And they are now editable from here, right? So we can add a project and we can change our due date just like this. And the same thing works just the same if you are on the board view. Tip number 62, freeze columns. Now this is super useful if you have databases with a ton of properties. Because what often happens if you scroll to the side, you might lose track of which entry you're actually looking at, right? What task was this again? I have no idea. Now, freezing columns solves this issue. Just right click the column that you want to freeze and then pick freeze up to column. And now if I go to the side, you see the tasks and everything to the left of it stays pinned. So if I say freeze up to days of the week, then everything up until here will remain. So that's very important, right? You can't just pick like certain properties that you want to have frozen. It will always freeze up to that property. So everything to the left of it will also stay frozen when you set this up. Tip number 63, drag your cells down to autofill them. Similar to Excel or Google Sheets, you can also in Notion just drag cells to fill the same one for the entries below. So let's say, for example, we have our days of the week, right, set to Tuesday here. And once you see this blue icon around here, you have this little drag thing and I drag it down and now everything will be filled to Tuesday. Tip number 64, use drag and drop for your databases. Now, this is actually two different applications. For one, you could simply drag and drop anything from a normal page content into a database and we'll create a new database item. So let's say stuff and to do, we want to drag that into our database. Now, one thing to be wary of is you see this indicator either highlights a line or it is this small line between two entries. Well, if it highlights a full other entry, that means you would drop it into that entry. So if I leave it here, right, I will actually add it to the quick entry task. So I open quick entry task and now there are two items on that page. We don't want that, right? We want it actually on the page itself. So let's just quickly drag them back out here again. And then instead of dragging them into an entry, let's drag them into the database once we see the line indicator. And now we have two items here. Quick reminder, if you set up like a filter, right? For example, if we set filter for only show days of the week with Tuesday, the forcing filter would apply here as well, so it would automatically fill that out. A second way to use drag and drop for your databases is to actually drag entries between databases or between the same database. Here we have two different views of this task database. We have a list that is filtered for entries that have no to-do date, and we have a calendar. So now we can just say, well, to-do, let's actually schedule it by dragging it on the 7th. And we'll automatically get that date and disappear here because now it has a due date, and the same for stuff. Tip number 65, bulk editing entries in databases. You can super quickly edit large amounts of information in a Notion database by simply selecting all the entries that you want. And you can do so either by dragging around them or by using the selector in the front, right? You can either select them individually or select all that are currently visible. And then you get two options. You have certain properties that pop up here and you can just change them like that, right? So I could say all of them, actually the due date should be tomorrow, and that will modify the due date for all of them. Or if it's a property that isn't shown there, you can also just right click into any of the selected options, and then you have the edit property option here, and there you see everything. So here I could say, well, actually in terms of days of the week, they all should be on Friday. Now that's the case. Tip 66, how to reapply database templates. Now, we've already seen how powerful these database templates can be to quickly create dashboards at scale, for example, with self-referencing filters. But the problem is that they don't automatically update. So we see our Grow Our YouTube channel page still has this information, whereas I actually went in and changed this here, right? This template now also has at the very top, like connected docs as some information. Now, how can we apply this template to our previous entries? Well, unfortunately, there's only one way to do so, and it involves deleting everything on the page. Yep, that's right. If I delete everything in the body of this page, then I get again the option to load in a template, and I can apply my new template that now has, the connected docs information as well. Now, there's obviously has some drawbacks, because if you, just wrote information in the tag in the body of this page, right? So, okay, this is an important thought, right? And some more stuff. Well, if you delete it, it's gone. So in these cases, you want to save that information first before you delete everything and then reload the template. But if most of the information on your template is actually a linked database, then you're in luck, because these links still remain, right? They are still linked in the properties, and if you just remove that information down here, nothing changes up here. So you can easily just reload it again and will still show you the same connected information. That's why it's also so great to use these different database setups and keep all your tasks in a database and not just in the body of the page, because you'll be able to quickly update the template and still have all the information there. Number 67, bulk applying database templates. Now, let's say, for example, we have a bunch of video ideas outside of our database and we want to move it into the task database. And we automatically want to apply a certain template while doing so. Now, one way, of course, would be to say in here, right, this should be our default template. But as you already know, this only works great if like all the entries in here are YouTube video and not if you have like 10 different templates. So what can you do in that situation? Well, it's a bit tricky and hidden, but what you can do is you can select all the entries that you want to move, and then click on the 6 dots and say, turn into page in. And now don't just select tasks, instead look for the name of your template. So our template had a name with YouTube in it. So we see add from template, new YouTube video. So if I click now this, they will be added in here and it will automatically apply the template that we have. And then up here, I just have these linked instances. I can also remove them because I don't need them anymore. And I have video idea 1, 2, 3 with the template already applied. Tip 68, use Notion buttons to quickly reset information. Now, this is actually quite a dangerous tip, so you need to be very careful with implementing it. But in the right situation, it can be quite helpful. With a button, you can quickly clear out certain information. So for example, in our task database, right, let's say we actually use the select trick to schedule our tasks for the week. But now on a Saturday or Sunday, when we schedule for the next week, we want to just move all our tasks back to 0 and then reassign them to different days. Now, instead of having to do that for all of them individually, right, go every time in and say, okay, no, actually it should not have a certain status, we can use a button to do that for us. So let's type /button and then say that we want to edit pages. Now again, this edit pages in command can be very, very dangerous because it can basically reset your whole database and then, well, you're gone with and nothing is in there anymore. So always be careful when you do that. The first thing you need to do is pick the database. So in this case, the tasks one. And then it asks you, well, which pages should be edited. And you see currently it would edit all pages and tasks, which means if you now do something like, okay, edit the task name and set it to untitled, you would remove the name of all these tasks, which is not good. So again, be careful here. The first thing you want to do is set a filter and set a filter for to pick the tasks that you actually want to edit. So in this case, I only want to edit tasks where the done thing is not done, right? So it should be not checked because I only want to reset tasks that haven't been done that actually show in my task manager. And then the second thing is I want to edit the ones where the days of the week property is not empty, right? So where it's currently filled. And then what I want to edit is not the task name, definitely not that, but instead I want to reset days of the week. And I just want to reset that to nothing, right? So that it's empty. And then we can go in here and say, okay, just call this reset week. days and click on done. And now whenever I hit this, it will remove all these select parts, so it will go back to 0. So we can just see right now here we have always a select property in here, and that's how it shows at the board. And once I click that button, all of that will disappear. So now you see nothing is left in here. And also that one on Wednesday, don't know why that's stuck. That's probably from the template. That's an error and a bug here that I will report. But for the other rest, it's all cleared out now.
If you plan on using Notion with others, you will face a whole host of different challenges. So here are some essential tips on using Notion with teams. Tip 69, start using groups. Now, if you are a company in Notion and you use it with several people, please stop adding individual people to individual pages and instead create certain user groups. Create them based on the permissions that they need, or create them based on the departments that they belong to, or based on the functions. That really comes down to how your company is run, but start creating these groups. Doing so is super simple. You just go to your settings and members, and then here under people, you will have on company workspaces under the group tabs the option to create these groups. And then you can organize your different members into these groups and then give access to a page to that group, or to a team space. And whenever you add a person to a group or you remove from them, you then also automatically add or remove them from a whole bunch of pages. A lot more efficient than doing it all individually. Tip number 70, use the new information feature for properties in your database. Now, the single most important thing when building a Notion workspace for a team is to make it easy to understand. And this feature will really help you here. You can now go into your database settings onto any property, and then let's say, for example, for the days of the week part, toggle on this information option. By just clicking on it, you are allowed to now add some sort of description. So we can say, okay, set the day of the week where you would like to complete this task. All right. Now, whenever someone looks at this database, they will see this information property and toggle, and they can hover over it to see the tooltip. Okay, I should set this so that I know when to complete a task. And even better, this also is true if they open the property, right? So if they open an entry, if they open an entry and we go down here to our very unorganized list of properties, we can also hover over it here and get the same tooltip. A real game changer to make your workspace easier to understand. Tip number 71, start using me filters. In a company setting, you typically want to create dashboards for your individual people so they can look at a database and only see the items that are relevant to them, right? If I look at this whole database, I only want to see the ones where I am responsible, not everything that all the other people have to do. And in order to do so, you could of course now go in and set up a filter that says, well, okay, the responsible person should be, and then I figure out my name, right? Matthias Frank. So I put that, and now it's filtered for that. And that's great, but that means you need to set up this dashboard individually for every single person in your team and always change that filter. No one has time for that. So instead, what you should do is to go in here and pick the me option. And the me option will also dynamically filter this database to show only entries for the person that is currently logged in. So the person is currently looking at this page, which means if I look at this page, I see the items that are relevant to me. And if someone else looks at this page, they will see the items relevant to them. Much, much quicker to set up dashboards for your whole team like this. Tip 72, use Notion together with Cron for better meetings. Did you know that Notion actually bought a calendar app? Well, it is amazing. It's called Cron, it's super helpful, and it's been my daily driver for a long time now. And recently, they released a nice new feature. You still can't fully sync everything together, but now you can, from your calendar, directly attach certain Notion docs to a meeting to share, for example, the agenda or the talking points with everyone else. So in this case, right, I have my important meeting coming up here, and then I can go and say docs and links. And this is linked to my Notion account already. So I can just go in and say create a Notion page, and I can title it, well, this is like the important meeting. I can pick in which workspace it should be created, and the location. I can create it from here. It will show up in my Notion, and then it's linked for everyone so everyone can easily access it who has been added to this meeting. Tip number 73, dynamically assign responsibility with buttons. Now, again, let's talk about UI. And buttons are a great way to add more and a more clearer UI to your Notion workspace. And the nice thing about them is that we can also have them dynamically fill out information. So we can say button, and we can, for example, call this button, let's say, all right, add new task. So for whenever one of your team members wants to add a new task, they can just hit that, add new task. And now when button is clicked, what we want to do is we want to add a page to our task database. And for the task, it will be still untitled, but we now will edit another property. We will edit responsible.
And for responsible, we will not put a specific person all the time, but we will put the person who clicked the button. So then last but not least, of course, you also want to here again like open the page that we just opened like previously as a side peek so that we can edit the rest of the information. But this is the crucial part, right? This allows us to dynamically fill this property with whoever hit the button, so we always know who should actually do something. So let's test it out. Let's say new task, test, and we see, okay, the person who's responsible is me. Great. Tip number 74 for teams, you need to assign ownership. Do you want a central Notion person who's responsible for everything and the go-to person? Or do you want to have a more decentral organization where either the different departments are responsible or like every individual is responsible for their own workflow? Both of them have advantages and disadvantages, but you need to make a decision. And at the end of the day, Notion is a tool in your tech stack. So just like you hire an IT person for your company to help with the general IT setup, you will need to invest some amount of resources to get Notion up and running and to keep it up and running. So let's quickly go through the different parts and what's better for who. So a central Notion person is great because it makes a clear responsibility. You can enforce the same structure everywhere, and the specialization allows you usually to build more complex builds because that person will be very, very good at their job. But you also need to invest a lot more dedicated resources, right? If that one person has to do Notion for the whole company, that's probably most of what they will do. You also have less customization of the different workflows, right? Because you have this more, okay, one size has to fit pretty much everything approach. Plus, it's a potential bottleneck if the support requests are too high for one person alone to handle. In a decentral organization, on the other hand, you can distribute the workload across many shoulders. You can have the individual preferences shine through more easily, and as a result, typically get an easier buy-in for any changes. But it also requires a lot more discipline to keep everyone running in somewhat the right direction. It's a lot more likely that you get system debt because no one single person makes sure to update things and to like get rid of old stuff. And it makes it much harder to adhere to best practices. So which one should you choose? Well, it of course depends on your company culture, but a good rule of thumb is that if you're a very small team, like below 6 people or below 10 people, then you can consider a decentral organization. But if you're a larger organization, you definitely need 1 or maybe even 2 or 3 central Notion people to take that job over for the whole company. Tip number 75, add responsible, approved, and valid until properties to your knowledge management system. Now, if you use Notion to organize the knowledge in your company, which is a very good use case for it, then you need to have these 3 properties in your database. And adding them is super simple. Just go to wherever you have your wiki to store your documents, because remember, you should keep everything in a database and not just as pages, and then add these properties. First, a person property and call it responsible. And this will be the person who has to keep that document up to date. And you can then use the me filters that I showed previously to show people on their dashboard only their documents. Second, add a status field and customize it according to the different document statuses that you have, right? The last one is probably the current approved document. Then the in progress one might be drafting and in review, and then a not started property to just indicate where a document is so that everyone at a glance can always see, okay, this document is actually final and approved. And very, very important, add a valid until. Now, there are a few ways how to implement that, but the easiest one would be just add a date property, call this valid until, and make sure that whenever a new document is approved, you put in a date somewhere in the future, and after that date, okay, someone has to look at it again. And with these 3 properties, you create a lot more ownership for the documents, and you make sure that once something is outdated, someone will look at it again. Tip number 76. Building a simple async team setup. With the help of Notion, it's actually really, really easy to run an asynchronous team. And one of the most important parts that you need to build for that is the document review cycle, where one person writes something down, right, and gives it to someone else to have a look at it. Now, in Notion, you only need 3 properties to implement that. So on top of the other properties that we have in our wiki, let's actually quickly just hide them so we have nothing else that can distract us. We need to add these 3 properties. First, a person property, and we will title this review required. Then another person property, which we will call reviewed by. And then a third property, which we will, this time a date property. And this one we'll call review until. And with these 3 properties, you can create this nice little async review setup. Because what happens now is you can ask people that whenever they create a document and they need someone else to review it, to please add these people to the review required column. Now, these people can then review that document, and once they've reviewed it, they can add themselves to the reviewed by column. And that, together with your review until property for a certain date, allows you then to create the correct views. So let me just show you what I mean. We can now here, let's pretend this is our dashboard, right? And I say, okay, these are my docs. And now I will create a linked version of this wiki database. And I want a new empty view. And maybe let's take a gallery view with no page content, just for like a clean look. And now let's set up the filter. And the filter here will be that the review required contains me, and that reviewed by does not contain me. And last but not least, if I want to see only the docs in the next week that I need to see, review until the start date will be relative to this week. And now I can name this to, the documents that review required. And last but not least, I will turn on here under the properties, the reviewed by property. And now I can see, okay, well, this is my dashboard, right? I see, okay, this is the document that I need to review, and I can go in, and once I've reviewed it, I can just add myself to reviewed by, and it will disappear from my queue. And if someone else then sends me another document, right, they might say, okay, please review also the big report, and please review the playbook, and do it all until, tomorrow. Then these two documents, again, will appear in my dashboard. And the second I say, well, okay, cool, I looked at it, it will disappear there. And of course, you can then build like the corresponding views on the other person's dashboard to see, okay, who actually looked at them already. And yeah, with just these three properties, you then have this very simple review setup. Tip number 77, use formulas as explainer properties. Now, occasionally you will be in a situation that you have a database and you have some numbers or some dates. And as long as you look at them in a table format like here, it's fine, because here you have immediately the corresponding context to it. But if you display the same information in a gallery view, you don't have it. Here, you just have the number, and you would need to hover over it to actually see what that number is about. Now, again, with one number, that doesn't matter too much, but just imagine you have like 2 or 3 different numbers. Maybe they correspond to different parts of the business, right? So let's put just like some other numbers in here. And you then again look at the gallery, and unless the person who's looking at it has an immediate idea or like knows exactly how this Notion workspace is built, it's very hard to tell which number means what. Here's where formulas as explainer properties come in. And they are super simple to set up. All you need to do is click on plus, create a formula, and then call it maybe like display number, just like some information for you to know what the property is doing. And then in quotation marks, add all the context that you want, right? So in this case, you could just put important number, colon, and close it, and then click on done. And then you see it fills it out for every single property. And here, of course, you don't need it. So here you can hide it. But in your gallery view, you can now turn on this display property and show it above the actual number. And now you see, okay, important number, that's 56. And then you would, of course, just go through the same process and create another one for 23. And then you know exactly which number means what. Tip number 78, create page settings to guide people through the process of setting up the properties the right way. Now, let's, for example, look at this wiki database, which has a ton of properties. You want to make it as easy as possible for your team to fill out the right properties in the right situation, and page settings are a great way to do so. Let's take the customer FAQs as one example. Once we click on them and open them as a full page, we see this page settings icon, and we can untoggle it to see that we have like different sections. So under general information, if I again click on a toggle, it expands to show me specific instructions on what I should do in order to fill out the general information. And then we show that specific entry from the database, right? Only customer FAQs, together with the properties that are relevant here. And if I open a different toggle, I see a different set of instruction and a different number of properties. This is a super helpful way to guide people through that and explain them in the right context which properties they should fill out. The setup is a bit longer, but I've linked through a detailed tutorial down in the description. Tip 79, help your team by pre-filling certain standard data with automations. Now, chances are that in your setup, you have a lot of properties that you require in order for everything to properly work. For example, who is responsible for a certain task, or what department a certain task or project belongs to. And people need to fill out that information, right? So that means more clicks whenever they create something new, which is more friction. In order to cut down on that friction, one thing you can do is, in particular when it comes to easy things like who's responsible or which department does it belong into, to set up an automation that sets up like some default properties. For example, it could be that you automatically, whenever someone creates a task and then no one is assigned responsible, it automatically later assigns the person who created the task as the responsible person. Or another example, if no department is filled out, you could automatically just assign the department of the person who created a task. Both of these automations are fairly simple to set up. If you want to see a detailed tutorial for that, let me know down below in the comments, but it's a great way to reduce the friction in your team and to get them start using the Notion workspace more. Tip number 80, sync Notion with your Google Drive. Notion is a great tool for a lot of use cases, but one thing where it's a bit more lackluster is when it comes to actual cloud storage. So if you have a lot of PDF documents, images or the like, then what I usually prefer doing is to store all of them in Google Drive and then set up an automation that whenever anything gets added to your Google Drive account, it automatically is added to your Notion Wiki database. And then in your Notion Wiki database, you simply store in a URL property the actual location on Google Drive, so you get the best of both worlds. You can organize it in a wiki in Notion, and you can store it on a Google Drive folder and don't have to fidget around with the actual, storage solutions in Notion. Tip 81, export a database CSV for user analytics. Notion doesn't come with a lot of built-in analytics, and sometimes it's nice to see who in your team is doing what, right? It could be the workload, it could be the general progress on their tasks, or maybe just who uses actually Notion and who doesn't. Now, one way to easily do that is to actually take your task database or one of your main databases in your system and open that as a full page. So we will actually turn this into a page and look at it on a full page, and then click on the three dots in the top right corner, and then under export, select the export CSV option. Once you've exported the CSV option, you can then import that CSV either into a tool like Google Sheets, Excel or Rows and create some pivot tables to analyze the data. Or you could also throw it into ChatGPT and ask it to analyze the data for you. And that way you can easily then say, with like even large data sets, how the certain progress on certain parts is, which users create the most tasks, what the average distribution of status is, and a lot other in-depth analytics. Tip number 82 is to use Rows to build a dynamic reporting dashboard. Rows is a spreadsheet tool that integrates with Notion, so you can sync all the data from your Notion account into the spreadsheet and then run either complicated analytics or create some awesome charts, and then you can re-embed these charts into Notion for live updates. So if you want to not only have a point-in-time snapshot with the CSV, then check out the blog article that I linked down below, connect Notion to Rows, and then re-embed these live updating analytics directly in your workspace. Last but not least, let's really push Notion to the limits. Here are the best tips to supercharge your workspace. Tip number 83, use links in formulas. Yes, you heard it right. Since Notion's recent formula update, you can now use actual clickable links directly in your formulas, and it's super easy to do so. All you need to do is create a new property, make it a formula, and then type in, your formula. And then the one property that you want to use is called link. So you type in link, and then you see the syntax for it is to first have the anchor text and then have your link in quotation marks. So if I just open the brackets now and say, this is awesome, and then close it off and then paste the link to my blog after here, I then get a link that is clickable, and whenever I click on that, I will go to my blog. Now, that is of course nice with the blog, but you can take it one step further by linking to certain Notion pages, right? So if you have, for example, use one of my earlier tips where I say, okay, depending on what information is shown in the database, use if statements to display something different here in the formula. You could combine that with this to show the user different other Notion pages that they should look at, right? So maybe you have a client, and that client goes through certain lead stages. Now, depending on the lead stage that it is, you could use that formula trick with link plus the if statement to direct your Notion users to different protocols, what they should mention on the next sale call, depending on where they are in the life cycle. Just as one example for this awesome feature. Tip number 84 is to assign responsibility based on the status with the help of Notion's database automations. Now, database automations are also a recent feature, and they allow us to do a bunch of cool stuff. And one of the most useful things right now is to assign a responsible person based on a select field that we have. And that could be the industry, but it could also be the status of a task. So in this example, let's actually work with industry. And let's say we have different clients, and depending on which industry they are in, we want to assign a different salesperson. And we have me, myself, and I who could take over the job. Now, with the help of the automation, I can set it up and see, I just click on here on the flash icon and then say new automation. And let's call this assign responsibility, and then our trigger will be that a property is edited and the industry is changed to a specific option, right? Not all properties unfortunately have these granular options, but for now, the select ones at least have it. So let's say if it's finance, then in my next step as the action, I want to assign the responsible to me. And now, whenever I add for any client that the industry is finance, I have to wait a second, and after that, the responsibility me will pop up here. And there we have it. Now I am responsible. Of course, you can then set this up for every single industry and for every single person. Another useful thing would be to set it up in a way that you say, okay, whenever we have, we might have a task pipeline, and whenever our YouTube video production goes to, needs editing, we automatically assign the editor, and so on and so on. Lots of useful ways, in particular, if you have these fairly structured ways of who's responsible for what. Tip number 84 is to use Tally to quickly capture submissions. Tally is one of my favorite tools to use in combination with Notion. They're an amazing form builder and they have an even better free plan. Now, with Tally, it's super simple to create forms and they have a very Notion-like interface, so you will have no time at all starting to use it. And it integrates directly with Notion, which means all the submissions can go directly into your Notion database without any additional steps in between. So whatever it is where you need a form builder for and to capture any entries, start using Tally, connect it to Notion and make some magic happen. Tip number 86, start using master tags. Now, master tags are one of my favorite ways to organize a Notion workspace, and I have a full dedicated tutorial for them down in the description, but I'll just quickly show you why they are so awesome. So let's take, for example, this academic writing template that I have here in Notion. And in this template, we have a bunch of things. One of these things that we want to organize are our readings, right? And we can tag them with our global tag, effective learning. And then when it's time to write something, we can pull up our writing template, right? We say, okay, this might be a new chapter. And now I go down here and I will say, well, this is a new chapter for my book. And in the topic section, once this down has loaded in, I can just use the global tag to say what it's about. Let's say this is about effective learning. And now it will automatically pull in everything in my workspace, all related readings, all related writings that I've ever done on this one topic. And I see them all on this page here and I can use them to directly start off. And the other thing that you can do is you can click on your global tag and then see across all databases that you have in your workspace, all the relevant information, right? All meeting notes, brainstorm notes, writings, everything that has to do with this one topic in one place. If you use several databases in your Notion workspace and you have information to categorize, according to similar criteria, you definitely need to start using global tags. Tip number 87 is to start using a statistics database. Again, it's a slightly longer setup, so full tutorial link down below. Just quickly see what you can do with it. Here in this task manager, we can use it to display this widget, which basically acts as a personal assistant and tells me, okay, I have 3 tasks due today, I have this many overdue tasks, deadlines coming up, and so on and so on. And you can completely customize it. No matter what information you have in Notion, you can use this approach to create these insights, analytics, and your personal task widget for pretty much anything. Tip number 88 is to learn Notion formulas, because they can really bring your workspace to the next level. Just look at this example. Here we have a fairly typical project management setup with projects and tasks. And thanks to the formula that we've written, we can identify the next in-line task. This automatically checks which tasks are not done yet and what's the next due date, and basically tells us, well, what we should be working on next. Just see what happens if I move this due date out. It will automatically now suggest that I do task D instead. But as soon as I check task D off, it will revert back to task A. And if task B was also an option, it would show us that one. So you see, this is one of many features and functions that you can only unlock if you learn Notion formulas. So again, link to a full tutorial in the description, but definitely put it on your list for the next year. Tip number 89 is to get some stunning charts into Notion using rows. Rows is a really cool spreadsheet tool and they natively integrate with Notion, so you can sync your data from Notion to rows, create a chart there and then re-embed it into Notion. And as soon as you update your Notion information, you can set up a refresh so that rows charts also update. And you have all the charts that you want, whether that's a pie chart to see how much you work on a given day, whether it's for expense tracking with multiple lines, or whether you want to see your subscriber growth. Rows has you covered in every situation and it can really spruce up your workspace. Tip number 90, use daily task reminders. Now, even if you keep all your tasks in Notion, sometimes it's still nice to have a reminder of them in your email inbox. And it's super easy to create a really nice looking email reminder like this one, where each of the reminders is actually a direct link to your Notion dashboard, so you can super quickly jump into it with just a small automation. This is how the small automation looks like. You basically want to search Notion through all the tasks that are assigned to you and then turn them into an email and send them to you. If you want to see a full tutorial on that one, let me know down in the comments below. I haven't recorded it yet, but if you want to see it, I'm definitely happy to create one. Tip 91, use push notifications. While Notion's built-in notification system isn't great, you can easily build another automation to send yourself push notifications that are fully customizable. It works with the iPhone, it works with Android, and the full tutorial is down below in the description. Super simple to set up, won't take you more than 5 minutes. Tip number 92, use Siri to Notion for quick capture. Did you know that you can just talk to your phone and automatically add things as tasks or notes to Notion? Well, it's possible with this shortcut. It's actually super simple to set up. I have again a link and a template for you down in the description. It shouldn't take you longer than 5 minutes, and then you're up and running with this tip. Next, create dynamic PDFs using Notion and Make. This is another way to supercharge your Notion workspace with the help of automations and involves Google Docs. Because Google Docs has this awesome feature where you can create a document from a template and you can create some merge tags in there. And these are basically placeholders that you can fill with your Notion data. So you could have in Notion a large database, right, of your customers or like of certain invoices, and then just send that to Google Docs as the information for the merge tags, download the Google Docs, send it to the person, and that way create these like awesome automatic dynamic PDFs right out of Notion. Tip number 94, connect Notion to ChatGPT. Why leave all your data just in Notion? If you use these automations, you can easily hook up Notion to the knowledge of ChatGPT and have it give you recommendations. For example, for this nutrition tracker in Notion, we can use ChatGPT in 2 ways. First, whenever you add anything to this database that you've eaten, it will automatically send it to ChatGPT to estimate your macronutrients. So it will automatically fill out the calories, carbs, fat, everything based on this estimate. And then second, at the end of the week, it will take everything that you've eaten and write some recommendations for you based on your diet. And that, of course, is just one example. You could also send all your tasks to ChatGPT from Notion and then ask it to review them, maybe in light of your OKRs, and help you whether you're actually aligned on making progress on what you said would matter. Just 2 examples, super powerful to start using Notion together with ChatGPT. Tip 95, create FAQ pages for things that you get asked all the time. Now, this is no longer the supercharge section, but I had a few last tips that didn't really fit in anywhere else, and this is the first one. If you get asked something all the time, or at least more than 3 times, then I would recommend that you actually start writing down the answers in Notion. And the next time someone asks you the same question, just direct them to the document. Whether you're at work and actually, help coworkers figure out certain things, or whether you're just an expert in a field because you made a trip to a place or it's your hobby, this will really help you share your information and knowledge with a lot more people while having fun using Notion. Tip 96, speed up Notion. Sometimes Notion can feel a bit slow, particularly if you have very large databases. And there are a few things you can do to optimize performance. The first thing is to actually switch to the desktop version of Notion, because that's typically a little bit faster. But if that's already the case, then here's what you can optimize on a page. The first thing to do would be, if you have a super large database, to set a max load number. And you can do that by clicking on the 3 dots and then going to load limit. And setting that to 10 will greatly increase how fast it loads, and then you can always manually load more entries, because typically you don't need to see everything at once. Second, reduce the number of properties that you show. So here in this case, we currently have all our properties showing, right? But we probably don't need to see everything all at once. So I would recommend to build tailored views that always only show the properties that you need. So hide everything and then just show the few items that you actually need in a specific view, and then create different views for specific use cases. And last but not least, you can also hide these different views behind toggles to further increase the load speed, because until you open the toggle, Notion won't have to load the information. Tip 97, install the Notion Web Clipper. The Notion Web Clipper is an extension for your browser that allows you to quickly capture information on the page and save it to Notion. If you use it on a desktop or on a laptop, you have to install it on your browser. If it's actually on your phone, then you just need to install the phone and share it with it, and will help you to quickly add anything to your wikis, to your task database, or just the resources that you want to remember. Tip number 98 is to join the Notion community. Whether it's on Reddit, LinkedIn, or Twitter, there are Notion communities all over the place, and it's a ton of fun to interact with everyone. So get on there and connect with fellow Notion fans. Plus, there are also a lot of in-person communities. For example, I run the local Berlin Notion community. So again, link for that in the description if you want to join any of our in-person meetups, but a lot of other cities have the same.
Oftentimes, the biggest problem with Notion are your unknowns. You simply don't know what's possible. This video has hopefully shown you already a ton of things, but don't stop here. Tip 99. Explore how other people are using Notion. And you're already in the best place to do so, YouTube. So up next, here's my 10-hour Notion mega video, which includes everything from beginner tutorials to step-by-step walkthroughs, all the way to really complex use cases. Are you ready? Just click here and I see you in a second.